The silence in the boardroom wasn't natural. No one spoke. No one moved. Not even Caspian Vera, the man whose presence normally owned every inch of a room. The tension had nothing to do with the multi-million-dollar deal outlined on the screen. It had everything to do with the sound that shattered the moment like glass. Mommy. One word. Small. Pure. But it hit Caspian like a memory he wasn't ready for. Heads turned toward the doorway. His eyes followed, and when he saw who stood there, everything inside him stalled. Time didn't slow. It broke. There she was. Ilara. And beside her, a little girl, maybe 5 or 6, holding her hand tightly, half hidden behind the fabric of her mother's coat. Curls spilling down her shoulders, cheeks flushed, wide eyes searching the unfamiliar room. If you're hooked already, hit subscribe so you never miss a story like this. Caspian didn't breathe. He didn't blink. His mind tried to organize this moment like a spreadsheet, tried to make it fit into logic, but logic abandoned him. She was never supposed to have a child. That had been the truth. The painful, silent truth that sat between them for years. The truth that eventually ended everything. And yet here she was, with a daughter. Their daughter? He didn't know. He couldn't know. But something about the child's eyes. Ilara, he managed, his voice dry and low. She nodded once in greeting. Simple, measured, calm, though her fingers rested protectively on the girl's shoulder. Her posture was different now, grounded, unshakable. She looked older, not in years, but in depth. The room around them didn't know what it was witnessing. A few executives shifted, glancing at each other, sensing something important was happening but not knowing what. Ilara, he said again, stepping out from behind the table. What is this? I'll explain, she replied, her voice clear. But not here. He looked at the child again. She wasn't afraid, just quietly watching. That same calm, that same knowing look that had once been Ilara's when she stood beside him in younger, happier days. The boardroom faded. The figures in suits blurred into the background. For the first time in a long time, Caspian couldn't focus on business. Not with her standing there, not with that little girl calling her mommy. Without saying more, Ilara gently turned and began to walk away, her daughter's hand still clasped in hers. Caspian didn't hesitate. He followed. They moved down the hall in silence. Every step echoed in his chest. He needed answers. Not in pieces. All of them. She stopped at the end of the corridor, near a quiet lounge with frosted glass walls. She opened the door and stepped inside. He followed, closing it behind him. The city skyline loomed beyond the windows, but he saw none of it. He saw only Ilara, and the child beside her, watching him with a face that pulled at something buried in him. Something he thought he'd shut off for good. He turned to Ilara. Tell me the truth. She looked at him, not with anger, not with regret. Just a deep, quiet ache. I will, she said softly. But not all at once. Caspian remained standing. He didn't sit, didn't pace, didn't speak. He was watching, really watching, Ilara. She sat on the edge of the couch, legs crossed at the ankle, her hand resting gently on Liana's back as the child climbed beside her. The quiet was full, not awkward, the kind that carried years of silence and things unspoken. Liana glanced at him. Her expression was unreadable, not shy, not bold, just present, curious but calm. Caspian's voice came out low. She's yours? Ilara met his gaze. Yes. A beat passed before he asked the next question. You told me you couldn't. I couldn't. At least that's what they said. But sometimes life shifts without asking what we expected from it. His jaw tightened. You should have told me. Her eyes softened, but her voice remained even. Would it have changed anything? He didn't answer. The truth? He didn't know. At the time, everything had felt final. He had accepted it, buried the pain, worn his ambition like armor. But now, he looked at the child again. There was no mistaking it, not anymore. The shape of her nose, the flicker of recognition in her eyes when he spoke, the faint dimple in her left cheek when she tilted her head. His daughter. I deserve to know, he said quietly, not with anger, but with something more fragile. Ilara's fingers gently stroked Liana's hair. You're right. But when I found out, you were already gone, and I didn't know how to reach you anymore. Not as the man I once loved, but as the man you had become. Caspian turned to the window. The city stretched outward in glass and steel, but nothing felt solid right now. "I'm not that man anymore," he said, almost to himself. "I believe you," Alara replied. Silence again. He slowly approached, crouching just enough to meet Leanna at eye level. She looked at him with quiet expectation. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. Leanna blinked. "Your mommy's friend?" Alara didn't correct her. Caspian gave a faint smile. "I'd like to be more than that," he said softly. The girl tilted her head, thoughtful. "Like a real friend? Or sometimes a friend?" He let out a breath, something like a laugh, but hollow. "Maybe one who doesn't leave." Leanna nodded, as if that made sense. "Okay." A tear pulled at the edge of Caspian's eye. He looked back at Alara, who hadn't moved. "She's everything," he said. "She is," Alara answered. "And I missed all of it." "Yes." His shoulders sank. The weight of 6 lost years suddenly felt heavier than any merger he had closed, heavier than every high-rise tower with his name on it. "I don't want to lose more time," he said. "That's not my choice to make anymore," she said, glancing toward Leanna. Caspian sat on the edge of a chair opposite them. "Let me earn it." Alara didn't respond. She looked at her daughter, who now hummed quietly to herself, legs swinging just above the floor. "This wasn't part of the plan," she whispered. Caspian nodded. "I know." They sat in the quiet again, 3 people tied together by threads they hadn't fully acknowledged. Leanna yawned, resting her head against Alara's side. The moment held, and Caspian stayed, no longer the CEO, no longer the strategist, just a man trying not to let this second chance pass through his hands. The lounge lights hummed faintly overhead, but neither Caspian nor Alara noticed. The air between them carried too much history to let anything else matter. Leanna had drifted into a light drowsiness, curled against her mother's side, her small hand clutching Alara's blouse as though it were an anchor. Her quiet breaths were steady, innocent, unaware of the storm building just beyond her. Caspian leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. His eyes searched Alara's face like a man searching for a map he once knew by heart. "When?" he asked finally. Alara's hand stilled on Leanna's curls. "After we signed the papers, not long after." His breath caught. The papers, those stark final signatures that had split them. "You didn't tell me." Her gaze did not waver. "You had already chosen your path. The empire, the boardrooms, the life where I didn't belong anymore. What would I have been to you, Caspian? A reminder of what you thought was impossible?" The words hit, but he didn't flinch. He deserved them. "Still," he whispered, "you would have been my everything. You always were." Alara's eyes softened but carried caution. "We tried. We both tried. But the silence between us became louder than our love." Caspian dropped his head into his hands for a moment, trying to gather the storm inside. His empire had never required him to bend, but this truth bent him without effort. He lifted his head again. "Alara, is she mine?" Her lips pressed together. She glanced at Leanna, still resting peacefully. "Look at her," she said gently. He did, and in that moment, he didn't need confirmation. The truth was etched into her face as clearly as if it had been carved. His daughter. Caspian rose and paced a few steps, then stopped at the glass wall overlooking the city. The skyline stretched endlessly, a reflection of his achievements. Yet he felt small before it. "Do you know what it's like," he said quietly, "to think the world is yours and realize you never had the one thing that mattered?" Alara's voice was steady. "I know, because I lived it too." He turned, meeting her eyes again. "I should hate you for keeping her from me. But I can't. I don't have space for hate. Only for the years I lost." She studied him. "You've changed. Maybe success looks different when you finally see what it cost you," he admitted. For the first time since the doorway moment, her expression faltered. A trace of the woman he once held close flickered in her eyes. Leanna stirred slightly, mumbling in her sleep. Caspian watched the small rise and fall of her chest. The sound was the gentlest proof of life he had ever known. He swallowed hard. "I don't want to be a stranger to her." Alara's reply came slow. "That depends on whether you're willing to be more than words. She deserves more than promises, Caspian. She deserves presence." He nodded. "Then presence is what she'll have." The room quieted again, the kind of quiet that carries weight rather than absence. Caspian realized this was no longer about what was possible. It was about what he was willing to fight for. He turned to Alara. Give me the chance. Not for me. For her. Her gaze lingered on him, searching for cracks, for signs of the old distance. But she found only a man stripped of every shield. And for the first time in years, she did not say no. The lounge had grown still, the hum of the building's systems barely audible. Caspian leaned back in the chair, his hands clasped tightly together, as though holding on to the moment with sheer force. Across from him, Alara adjusted slightly, careful not to disturb Liana, who was now fast asleep against her side. He stared at the little girl, at the even rise and fall of her chest, and the tiny hand that still clung unconsciously to her mother's dress. Every detail struck him with an ache both painful and beautiful. The child he never thought possible was breathing just feet away from him. "Alara," he said, his voice breaking the fragile quiet. "How did you carry this alone?" Her eyes flicked to him, then back to Liana. One day at a time. Some days felt unbearable, others she made everything light again. He swallowed hard. "I should have been there." "Yes," she replied. No accusation, no bitterness, just a fact. The simplicity of her answer cut deeper than anger ever could. He pressed his palms together, lowering his voice. "Tell me about her." For the first time that night, a faint smile touched Ilara's lips. She loves stories. Every night she asks for one before bed. Not short ones, long ones, full of adventure. She has more curiosity than I can keep up with. And she's stubborn. When she decides something, nothing can sway her. Caspian's chest tightened. "That sounds familiar." Alara's eyes softened at his attempt at humor, though she didn't laugh. "She deserves the world, Caspian. I've tried to give her what I can." He nodded slowly. "And she will have more, I promise you." Alara shifted slightly, her brow furrowing. "Promises don't matter if they break. I won't let her grow up depending on someone who disappears." "I won't disappear," he said quickly. Too quickly. His voice carried urgency, but also fear. The fear of losing this chance before it had begun. Alara studied him, as if weighing not only his words but the man speaking them. She had known Caspian at his best and at his worst. She had seen the cracks no one else dared to notice. Could he be different now? Could he hold steady where once he had faltered? Caspian leaned forward, elbows on his knees again. "The empire I built. It doesn't mean anything if I don't have her, if I don't have both of you. I see that now." Her lips parted slightly, as though his words stirred something long buried. But she guarded herself, the way one does when hope feels too dangerous. "She'll want to know who you are," Alara said. "Then let me show her," he replied. "Day by day, not as the man I was, but as the father she deserves." For a long moment, neither spoke. The quiet wrapped around them, thick with 1,000 unspoken emotions. Then Alara looked down at Liana, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. "She's my heart," she whispered. Caspian's throat tightened. "Ours," he said softly. Alara didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either. Outside the lounge window, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm. Cars, lights, lives moving on. Yet in that small space, time felt suspended. The world had shrunk to 3 souls trying to find their place again. For Caspian, the realization came sharp and clear. This was not a negotiation. This was not a victory to win. This was the beginning of a new fight, one he could not afford to lose. Liana stirred slightly, shifting against her mother's arm. Alara stroked her daughter's hair in a rhythm so natural that Caspian felt a pang of loss for every moment he had missed. He sat still, taking in each detail, the tiny breaths, the way her fingers, curled even in sleep, the quiet trust with which she rested. "She doesn't know," Caspian whispered. Alara's eyes met his, steady. "No, she only knows me, and she knows she's loved." He nodded, struggling to keep his composure. "She deserves to know more, to know me." Alara's expression softened, but it carried weight. "That depends on who you choose to be now, not who you were then." His jaw tightened. "I will choose her. I will choose both of you, every time." The conviction in his voice surprised even him. He had spent years convincing himself nothing could touch him. Yet here, in front of this small child and the woman who had once been his world, all his defenses collapsed. Alara studied him carefully, searching for any sign of doubt. "Words are easy, Caspian. Then let my actions speak," he replied firmly. The hum of the city outside seemed distant, as though the world beyond that lounge no longer mattered. Caspian leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Tell me about her first years." I want to know everything I missed." Ilara hesitated, then sighed. She was small when she came into the world, too small. I was terrified. But she fought. Every breath, every day, she grew stronger. By the time she was 2, she was already running through the house, asking endless questions. She loves to paint, though she ends up with more colors on herself than the canvas. And she sings, not always on key, but with all her heart. Caspian's chest tightened with each word. Every detail was a reminder of time stolen from him, yet also a glimpse of the life he could still step into. "She sounds extraordinary," he said. "She is," Ilara replied softly, brushing a hand across Leanna's cheek. For a moment, silence settled between them again. But it was different now, not empty, not accusing. It was filled with possibilities, fragile yet alive. Caspian exhaled slowly. "I can't change the past, but I can change what comes next. Let me prove it." Ilara looked down at Leanna, then back at him. Her eyes glistened faintly, though her voice stayed calm. "If you want to be in her life, you have to understand something. This isn't about winning me back or making up for old regrets. This is about her, every decision, every moment. She is the center now." "I know," he said, his voice steady, "and I wouldn't have it any other way." For the first time that evening, Ilara's guard lowered, just a fraction. Enough for him to glimpse the woman he had once built a life with, and perhaps the woman he could build a life with again. Leanna murmured in her sleep, a soft sound that drew both their eyes. Caspian reached across the small table, his hand stopping just short of Ilara's. He didn't touch, didn't push, but the gesture alone carried meaning. "Let me be here," he whispered. The weight of the years between them hung heavy, but something shifted in Ilara's expression. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of a beginning. And in that fragile pause, Caspian knew this was no accident. This was fate returning to test him. The past was waiting. The story of how they had once loved, lost, and fractured demanded to be told. The truth of their beginning was about to surface. The university library wasn't quiet in the way one might expect. It wasn't silence. It was a low hum of pages turning, pens scratching, chairs shifting as students tried to conquer their assignments. For Caspian Vera, it was the perfect place to focus. Numbers lined the pages before him, charts, projections, outlines of case studies. He lived in figures, in order, in the sharpness of logic. The world made sense when it could be calculated. That day, though, his concentration fractured for the first time. He noticed her before he realized he had. A young woman navigating the aisles with her arms full of books stacked nearly to her chin. Poetry volumes, art anthologies, titles that had nothing to do with the finance section he had claimed as his territory. Her steps were hurried but graceful, her focus intent on balancing the tower of words she carried. One slipped. It tumbled to the floor with a dull thud. She shifted awkwardly, unable to reach down without risking the entire pile. Caspian closed his notebook without thinking. He stood, bent down, and retrieved the fallen book. Their eyes met when he handed it back. "Careful," he said simply, his tone practical, almost clipped. "Thank you," she replied, her voice carrying warmth that softened the sterile rows of books around them. She tilted her head, smiling slightly, as though even this small encounter amused her. He returned to his seat, expecting the interruption to fade. But she lingered in the aisle, scanning the shelves for more. Out of habit, his gaze followed her, studying how she carried herself. Light on her feet, a contrast to his grounded, deliberate movements. Minutes later, she appeared at the neighboring table, carefully lowering her stack. The books landed with a soft thump. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and opened one volume, already lost in its lines. Caspian tried to ignore the presence beside him, but his focus on figures slipped. He found himself glancing at the titles spread before her. Rilke, Whitman, Dickinson. Names that lived in emotion, not calculation. "You like poetry," he remarked, not sure why he spoke at all. She looked up, surprised, then smiled faintly. "I love it. Words can carry things numbers never can." He raised a brow. "Numbers don't lie." "Neither do poems," she answered, unbothered. "They just tell truths differently." The corner of his mouth threatened a smile, though he masked it quickly. He wasn't accustomed to conversations that slipped so easily beyond his control. Hours passed in the same space, 2 worlds side by side, his filled with numbers, hers filled with verses. Occasionally, their eyes met across the table. Once, when she reached for her pen, it rolled toward him, and he returned it. Their fingers brushed lightly. A spark flickered, quiet but undeniable. When she gathered her books to leave, she paused. "I'm Alara," she said, her tone neither shy nor bold, simply certain. "Caspian," he replied. For a moment, neither moved. Then she smiled again, soft and genuine. "Maybe I'll see you here next time." He didn't answer, but when she walked away, the space beside him felt different, lacking. That night, as he reviewed his notes, the numbers blurred faintly. He found himself thinking not of projections or margins, but of eyes that had met his with unguarded openness. It unsettled him. It intrigued him. And it would not be the last time. The following week, Caspian returned to the library at his usual hour. His routine was sacred, same seat, same stack of case studies, same rhythm of study and notation. Yet as he set down his books, he caught himself glancing toward the aisle where she had appeared before. He told himself it was coincidence, but when Alara walked in minutes later, balancing a more modest armful of books, his chest tightened in a way he hadn't expected. She noticed him almost instantly. Their eyes met, and her lips curved into the kind of smile that acknowledged not just recognition but a quiet connection. She made her way to the same table as before and set her things down. "You again," she said lightly, settling into her seat. Caspian adjusted his notebook. "I could say the same." Her laughter was soft, unforced. She opened a book of poems, running her fingers across the page as though the words were tangible. He found himself watching the small movement before quickly redirecting his gaze to his own papers. "What are you working on?" she asked after a moment, tilting her head toward his neatly arranged charts. "Financial models," he answered. Her brow arched playfully. "That sounds thrilling." "It is, actually," he said seriously, then caught the sparkle in her eyes and allowed the faintest smile to slip through. "And you?" he asked. She leaned back, cradling the book in her hands. "Poetry. Because sometimes the world doesn't make sense, and poems remind me it doesn't have to." Caspian studied her, puzzled but intrigued. He lived in a world where everything had to make sense, where logic solved problems and numbers guided choices. Her perspective was foreign, and strangely refreshing. They spoke in short intervals that afternoon, the silences between, them filled not with discomfort but with a strange growing ease. When Alara packed up to leave, she paused again. "I like this spot," she said, gesturing to the table. "Maybe I'll keep coming back." Caspian met her gaze. "Then I suppose I'll see you here." And so it began. Over the next weeks, their paths crossed again and again. At first by chance, later by intention. She always carried books brimming with verses. He always carried numbers. Between them grew a rhythm, a curious balance of logic and emotion, discipline and spontaneity. Sometimes she would read aloud a line that struck her voice soft but vibrant. He would listen, arms crossed, pretending to be unmoved, though inside he felt something stir he couldn't quite name. Other times she would ask him to explain a formula, teasing that it sounded like a secret code. He obliged, watching her brow crease in concentration, only for her to laugh and admit she was lost. It was during one of those afternoons that he realized he looked forward to these encounters more than anything else. One evening, as the library lights dimmed near closing, they walked out together. The campus was alive with voices, yet within their small bubble, the world seemed quieter. She pointed out the glow of lampposts, how they lined the pathways like guardians of the night. He pointed out the symmetry of the buildings, the structure that kept everything balanced. Their differences didn't divide them. They fascinated them. At the library steps, she turned to him. "Same time tomorrow?" He hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Yes." As she walked away, Caspian realized something unsettling and undeniable. For the first time, numbers weren't the only thing that made sense to him. They began meeting outside the library without ever saying the word date. Coffee first, then long walks across campus courtyards, and quiet corners of a small diner where the server learned their names. Caspian would arrive with a notebook tucked under his arm, Alara carried, a battered journal threaded with ribbons and loose slips of paper. He outlined goals in clean lists. She sketched phrases in the margins, little fragments that glowed when she read them aloud. He learned that she tutored freshman writers and that she could memorize lines after a single reading. She learned that he woke before dawn to run, that his schedule lived in 10-minute blocks, and that he hated being late. With her, time loosened. The first time she asked about his family, he hesitated, then answered honestly. My father is a planner, he said. He believes success is a sequence, preparation, execution, results. He paused. My mother believes in outcomes you can feel but can't measure. He gave a small shrug. Maybe I'm somewhere between them, and not brave enough to admit it. Alara smiled. Or maybe you're both. Structure with a pulse. The phrase lodged in him like a seed. After that, he noticed how often she gave names to things he couldn't quite describe. When he struggled to explain why a strategy worked, she answered with a single image that made it click. When she wrestled with a stubborn stanza, he suggested a constraint, syllables, rhythm, and the poem opened. They made a habit of trading challenges. He would close his eyes while she read, then repeat the lines from memory. She would try to summarize a complex model in 3 sentences without losing meaning. They kept score for fun, then forgot to keep score at all. One evening, while campus lights flickered on, they found themselves sitting on the library steps, sharing warm pretzels. A group of students spilled past them, laughing. Alara leaned her shoulder against his. "Tell me a dream," she said. He blinked. "A dream?" "Yes, one that isn't about money." He considered. "I want to build something that lasts, not just a company, a place where people feel safe to do their best work, where ideas have a home." She nodded. "A home for ideas," she echoed. "I like that." He tipped his head toward her. "Your turn." She looked at the old brick of the library facade. "I want to teach, not just in a classroom, but in ways that outlive me. I want words to help people carry what they can't carry alone." He listened, the pretzel warm in his palm, her words warmer still. "We could do both," he said before he could stop himself. "Your light, my structure." Her cheeks lifted at the corners. "That sounds suspiciously like a proposal from a man who hasn't set a date." He laughed, a real, unguarded sound that surprised him. "Not a proposal, a blueprint. Blueprints become buildings," she said lightly. He held her gaze. "Some do." The space between them thinned. He reached for her hand, slow enough to let her refuse. She didn't. Their fingers threaded, and the simple contact felt like a completed equation, solved and certain. After that night, the campus looked different. Not because buildings changed, but because he carried her presence through every hallway. Finals, projects, competition, none of it lost importance, but it lost its tyranny. He could breathe. He didn't say the word love. Neither did she. They didn't need to. Not yet. For now. The winter break came, and most students scattered to their homes. Caspian stayed, determined to use the quiet campus to refine his projects. He didn't expect Alara to remain as well. Yet one morning, while he pored over financial reports in the library, she appeared in a bright scarf, a steaming cup of cocoa in hand. "You look like you've been here for hours," she teased, sliding into the chair across from him. "Eat something warm, or I'll read until you cave." He raised an eyebrow. "Read what?" She lifted a slim book of poems and grinned. "Don't test me." For the next hour, she alternated between sipping her cocoa and reading aloud. Her voice carried through the empty library in a way that felt both daring and safe. Caspian found himself lowering his pen, caught by the cadence. Numbers lost their hold on him that day. Her words did not compete with logic. They expanded it. They began to explore the city together. Cafes where she sketched verses on napkins, art galleries where she lingered before brushstrokes as if they were conversations. Caspian followed, half skeptical, half enthralled. She listened as he spoke of market strategies with the same intensity she gave to paintings. Where he saw calculations, she saw story. He realized she wasn't simply indulging him, she was teaching him to look differently. One evening, snow blanketed the quad. They walked side by side, their footprints marking twin paths. Caspian tucked his hands into his coat pockets. "What do you see when you look at all this?" he asked. Alara tilted her head, considering. "Possibility," she said softly. "The way each step leaves a mark and then disappears as more snow falls. Proof that we were here, even if it doesn't last." He nodded slowly. "I see the logistics of snow removal." She laughed, a sound that melted the cold between them. "Of course you do." Yet beneath the banter was something deeper. They weren't mocking each other's perspectives, they were weaving them together. Her vision stretched his boundaries, his discipline steadied her dreams. Their friends began to notice. At gatherings, Caspian and Alara gravitated toward each other without thought. She softened his edges. He gave structure to her whims. People whispered that they didn't make sense, that someone so rigid and someone so free-spirited couldn't last. But those whispers only tightened the bond between them. One night, after a long walk back from a lecture, Caspian stopped at the entrance of her dorm. The air was crisp, his breath visible. He hesitated, then said, "You make me see more than I used to." Ilara's eyes shone. "And you make me believe I can hold my dreams without losing them." For a moment, silence wrapped around them. Then Caspian reached out, brushing her gloved hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned closer, her forehead resting lightly against his chest. His heart pounded in ways numbers could never explain. That was the night he knew. He hadn't named it yet, but he knew. This wasn't a passing fascination. It was something anchoring itself in him, steady and unyielding. And though neither spoke the word aloud, both understood that they had crossed a threshold. What began as library tables and scattered conversations had become something undeniable. It was no longer just a meeting of minds. It was the quiet beginning of forever. Spring returned to campus, and with it came a shift neither Caspian nor Ilara could ignore. What had begun as conversations in quiet corners deepened into something that followed them everywhere. They spent afternoons stretched across the green lawn, her journal open, his notes scattered, sunlight pooling around them. Caspian worked through formulas, pausing whenever she nudged him with a question or a line of poetry. Sometimes she would rest her head on his shoulder, reading silently while he scribbled. The contrast should have clashed, but instead, it blended, the harmony of logic and lyric. One weekend, he invited her to a lecture hosted by a visiting economist. She sat through the presentation, listening intently, though Caspian worried she might be bored. Afterward, she surprised him. "I understood more than I expected," she said, adjusting her bag. "But tell me, how would you explain that theory to someone who hates numbers?" He smiled faintly. "I'd say, it's like planting seeds. The soil represents risk, water is effort. If you combine the right balance, growth becomes inevitable." Her lips curved. "See? You're a poet when you try." They laughed, and the ease between them felt like something permanent. In return, she invited him to a student showcase where she read one of her poems aloud. He sat in the back, arms folded, but his eyes never left her. The verses flowed from her with confidence, and when the audience applauded, pride surged through him in a way he hadn't expected. Afterward, when she joined him, he whispered, "You own that stage." Her expression softened. "You believe in me, don't you?" He didn't hesitate. Yes. From then on, their connection deepened beyond campus walls. He took her to restaurants he had saved for special occasions, though she teased him about always booking the best table. She took him to hidden art galleries, where he learned to stand still before canvases instead of rushing past them. Each experience was a trade, his structure for her spontaneity, his certainty for her wonder. One late night, while they sat on the library steps, Ilara whispered, "Do you ever think about the future?" "All the time," he admitted, "but in outlines. 5 years, 10 years, milestones. And in those outlines," she asked, her voice careful, "do you see someone beside you?" He met her gaze. "Yes, you." Her breath caught, though she tried to hide it. For Caspian, the answer wasn't a declaration, it was a certainty. She had already become the axis around which his plans turned. By the time graduation neared, their bond was no longer questioned. Their friends teased them about being inseparable. Professors nodded knowingly when they arrived together. Even strangers could see the connection in the way they moved, two people with different rhythms who somehow walked in step. Caspian made a choice then. One evening, in a quiet park lit by lanterns, he took her hand and spoke without ceremony. "Marry me," he said. "Not someday. Now. While the world is opening for us." Ilara blinked, stunned, then laughed through sudden tears. "That's not much of a speech." "I don't need speeches," he said, gripping her hand tighter. "I just need you." She pressed her forehead against his, whispering, "Yes." In that instant, Caspian felt the world tilt into alignment. His empire could wait. His plans could bend. Love had become the foundation upon which everything else would rise. Their wedding wasn't extravagant. Caspian could have afforded grandeur, crystal halls, towering cakes, an endless guest list. But when Ilara asked what he truly wanted, his answer was simple, something honest. So they chose a chapel on the edge of town, its wooden beams weathered, its pews filled with only the closest of friends and family. Ilara walked down the aisle in a gown that wasn't lavish, but carried elegance in every fold. Caspian stood waiting, his expression unguarded for the first time in years. When their vows were spoken, they weren't polished speeches. They were promises whispered with trembling voices. He vowed to protect her dreams as if they were his own. She vowed to soften his sharp edges without dulling his fire. When they kissed, it wasn't the rush of youth, but the steady embrace of two souls choosing forever. The applause that followed was small compared to the certainty in their hearts. Married life began in a modest apartment, their furniture second-hand, their bank accounts stretched. Yet the space was alive with laughter. Alara filled walls with art, Caspian filled shelves with books. Their mornings started with her humming over coffee and ended with his voice reading articles aloud, while she pretended to listen. They built routines, but none felt heavy. Even the smallest rituals carried intimacy. On Fridays, they cooked together, sometimes burning the meal, always ending with laughter. On Sundays, they walked through the park, imagining futures. It was during one of those walks that Alara spoke softly. "Do you ever think about children?" Caspian's steps slowed. "Every day," he admitted. Her hand slipped into his. "I imagine a little one with your stubbornness and my love of stories." He smiled. "I imagine a home filled with both discipline and wonder, numbers and verses." They dreamed freely in those days. A nursery with sunlight spilling across pale walls. Bedtime stories told with equal parts reason and magic. Holidays where laughter echoed through crowded rooms. They believed nothing was beyond them, not with love as their foundation. Caspian threw himself into building his career, but this time it wasn't to escape. It was to provide. Every contract, every promotion, every late night at the office carried purpose, fuel for the life he and Alara envisioned. She supported him, never asking him to shrink his ambition. Instead, she reminded him to rest, to laugh, to remain human. Alara pursued her teaching, her classroom filled with students who found safety in her kindness. Caspian often stopped by after hours, leaning against the doorway, watching her animate the room with gestures and stories. He marveled at the way she could capture attention without demanding. The way she gave herself fully to others without losing herself. Together, they wove dreams into daily life. Their love became a rhythm, firm but fluid, stable yet alive. Friends admired them, calling theirs a union of opposites. Caspian corrected them once, whispering to Alara after a dinner party, not opposites. "Compliments?" She smiled, kissing his cheek. Exactly. Years stretched ahead of them, golden with promise. They believed in a future that would hold both empire and art, both logic and poetry, both the hard truths of life and the soft places where love could grow. In those days, they did not imagine failure. They only saw the fullness of possibility. Tell us in the comments, do you believe opposites truly attract? We'd love to hear your thoughts. The first months of marriage carried a glow that felt untouchable. Their apartment might have been small, but it was alive with warmth. Caspian rose early, already in suit and tie before Alara's eyes were fully open. She teased him for being rigid, while he adored the way. She lingered in mornings, drifting between bed and the aroma of coffee. They laughed often, spoke freely, dreamed aloud. And then the whispers began, questions from friends, offhand remarks at gatherings. "When will there be little feet in this home? You'll make wonderful parents." Each comment was harmless in tone, but it left shadows when the guests left. At first, they dismissed the pressure. Caspian would kiss her hand, murmuring, "In our time." Alara would smile, believing it. But as months passed, their smiles grew thinner. Alara counted days on a calendar she kept tucked in the kitchen drawer. Caspian noticed but said nothing, fearing that naming her hope aloud might hurt her more. She took test after test, only to set them quietly in the trash. He saw the emptiness in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. The doctor appointments came next. Bright offices, white coats, sympathetic nods. Words like probability, treatments, and options. Each meeting ended with more paperwork, more questions, but never the answer they wanted. Caspian tried to stay steady. He told himself his role was to be strong, to shield Alara from despair. He immersed himself in work, as if corporate victories could soften private defeats. But at night, lying beside her, he could feel the distance growing. Her body faced away, her breaths uneven. He reached for her sometimes, but she would shift slightly, not rejecting him outright, yet not inviting him either. They argued quietly at first. "You're never here," she said one evening, as he loosened his tie. "I'm here now," he replied. "Your body is, not your heart." His throat tightened. I'm trying to hold us together. By disappearing into your office? She whispered. He didn't answer. He couldn't find the right words. The weight between them pressed heavier with each passing season. Friends stopped asking questions, sensing the tension. But silence at home was worse than questions from outside. Alara buried herself in art classes, surrounding herself with students' laughter. Caspian buried himself in boardrooms, commanding every decision with precision. When they met at night, their conversations turned shallow. How was your day? Fine. Dinner's on the stove. Thanks. Words filled the air but carried no life. One evening she found him at the dining table, laptop open, charts glowing across the screen. She placed a folder in front of him, medical results, pages heavy with terms. He glanced at the first line. His chest constricted. So it's final. Alara lowered her gaze. Yes. The silence afterward was unbearable. Not a storm of shouting, not slammed doors, but something worse, quiet acceptance of an ending they never wanted. She whispered, I wanted to give you everything, a family, a future. He reached for her hand, but she pulled back gently. You gave me love, he said. That was everything. Her tears slipped soundlessly. She shook her head. Love isn't enough if it keeps breaking. That night they lay in the same bed but felt worlds apart. Caspian stared at the ceiling, listening to her muffled sobs, and for the first time, he feared they would not survive this. The next morning began like many others, sunlight spilling into the kitchen, the kettle whistling. Softly, but the air between them felt fragile, as though one wrong word might shatter it. Alara moved quietly, setting a cup of coffee before Caspian without meeting his eyes. Thank you, he said, his voice restrained. She nodded, returning to the counter, her robe brushing against the tiles. He wanted to tell her she looked beautiful, even in her stillness, but the words caught in his throat. Compliments seemed hollow now, unable to mend the cracks that had formed. They sat across from each other, silence stretching, interrupted only by the scrape of cutlery. Finally, Alara whispered, Do you ever think we were too different? Caspian lowered his fork. Different doesn't mean wrong. It might when it comes to this, she murmured, pressing a hand against her abdomen, as if the absence there was a wound neither could heal. His chest tightened. Don't say that. This isn't your fault, but it feels like mine, she admitted. Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. He reached across the table, trying to take her hand. This time she let him, but her fingers were limp in his grasp. We can still have a life, he insisted. Together, children or not. Her eyes glistened. But is that enough for you? The question lingered between them, sharp and unyielding. He wanted to say yes without hesitation, but something in his silence betrayed him. Her gaze lowered, and she pulled her hand free. The days that followed blurred together. They spoke less, laughed less, lived less. The vibrant spark that once colored their marriage dulled into routine. Caspian tried to compensate by offering solutions, adoption, treatments, surrogacy, but each suggestion landed like a weight rather than a lifeline. You think you can fix this like a problem at work, Alara said one evening, exhaustion in her tone. I'm trying to give us options, he replied, frustrated. She shook her head. What I need isn't another plan. I need you to sit with me in the ache. But sitting in the ache was something Caspian didn't know how to do. He measured success in solutions, not stillness. His attempts at reassurance sounded like strategies. His love, though real, felt mechanical in delivery. One night, after another tense dinner, he found her curled on the couch, sketchbook on her lap. She wasn't drawing anything. The pencil simply rested against blank paper. Alara, he began, his voice soft. She didn't look up. I'm tired, Caspian. Tired of fighting for something that refuses to come. Tired of feeling like I'm disappointing you every month. You've never disappointed me, he said firmly. Her eyes finally met his, brimming with unshed tears. Then why do I feel like I'm losing you? He had no answer. His silence was louder than any words he might have spoken. They drifted into separate rhythms. Caspian stayed later at the office. Alara filled her evenings with classes and community projects. They still shared a bed, but the space between them grew colder each night. Touch became rare, kisses absent, words empty. Their love hadn't disappeared. It lingered like a ghost, present but unreachable. They still remembered the warmth they once carried, but it slipped further away with every unspoken sentence. One evening, Alara whispered into the darkness, thinking he was asleep. I miss us. Caspian heard her. He didn't move. He didn't speak. And that silence was the clearest admission of all, that they were no longer the same. The tension that once lingered quietly between them began to sharpen. What had been silence turned into words that cut, sometimes softly, sometimes with force neither intended. It began with small disputes, forgotten groceries, misplaced keys, an unanswered call. Matters that once would have ended in laughter now grew into sparks of irritation. "You didn't even hear me," Alara said one evening, folding laundry with quick, frustrated movements. "I heard you," Caspian replied, loosening his tie. "I'm just tired." "You're always tired," she snapped. He froze, then sighed heavily. "Because I'm carrying this for both of us." The room stilled. Alara's hands dropped, the fabric slipping from her grasp. "Is that what you think? That I've given you nothing to carry?" "That's not what I meant," he said quickly, but the damage was done. Their arguments followed patterns. He spoke in solutions, she spoke in pain. Neither language met the other. When friends invited them out, they declined. When family asked how they were, they said fine. Behind closed doors, their apartment felt smaller each day, the walls closing in around unspoken grief. Caspian tried to pour energy into his career. He secured deals, impressed shareholders, and returned home with achievements he hoped might distract from their emptiness. Alara, however, saw through it. "You can't buy away what's missing," she whispered once, her voice hollow. One night, the storm finally broke. Alara stood by the window, arms crossed, staring out into the city lights. Caspian entered, setting his briefcase down. "You're late again," she said without turning. "There was a meeting," he answered. "There's always a meeting." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Alara, I'm doing this for us." She spun toward him, eyes blazing. "For us? Or for the version of yourself that doesn't have to face what's happening here?" The accusation struck harder than she intended, but she didn't retract it. His jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "I'm trying to hold us together," he said through gritted teeth. "No," she countered. "You're trying to outrun the ache, and you're leaving me behind while you do it." The silence afterward was brutal. Caspian felt cornered, by her words, by his own helplessness. He had conquered everything life demanded, but here he was, powerless. And powerlessness was a language he had never learned to speak. Later that night, they sat on opposite sides of the bed, neither touching. The distance between them felt wider than oceans. "I don't know how to reach you anymore," Alara whispered into the dark. His reply was quiet, almost broken. "Maybe I don't know how to be reached." It was the most honest sentence he had spoken in months, and it terrified them both. In the weeks that followed, the house became a place of ghosts. The laughter that once filled it was gone. Meals were eaten in silence. Evenings were spent in separate corners. Love still existed, but it was buried under layers of resentment, fatigue, and sorrow. Alara began to wonder if staying together meant living in slow collapse. Caspian, though he never said it aloud, feared the same. One evening she closed her sketchbook and said softly, "We're breaking, Caspian." He looked at her, the weight of the truth pressing down. "I know," he whispered. The words hung in the air like a final bell tolling. Neither spoke again. Neither needed to. Both knew the fracture had begun to split into something they might never repair. Spring returned, but the brightness outside their windows did not enter their home. Caspian rose earlier than ever, often gone before Alara stirred. She noticed the quiet absence of his mug in the sink, the missing echo of his footsteps. She learned to expect loneliness. One morning she left a note on the counter, "Let's talk tonight." Caspian found it hours later, folded neatly beside the fruit bowl. He stared at the words, then tucked the note into his pocket. By evening he returned late, his tie loose, his face weary. She sat waiting at the table, her sketchbook closed before her. "You saw the note," she said. "I did," he replied, slipping into a chair. "Then talk to me." He exhaled, pressing his palms together. "What do you want me to say? That I'm hurting? That I feel like I've failed you? You know all of that already." Her eyes glistened. "I don't want rehearsed lines, Caspian. I want you. The man who once read my poems with awe. The man who dreamed with me." His throat tightened. "That man is still here. He's just buried under the weight of what we can't change." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I miss him. I miss us too," he whispered. The words should have pulled them closer, but they only deepened the ache. They sat in silence, the weight of grief pressing heavier than speech. Days blurred. When Caspian tried to initiate intimacy, Alara turned away, not out of rejection but out of exhaustion. When she tried to share her art, he nodded absently, his mind still trapped in boardrooms. Each attempt at closeness failed, reinforcing the gulf between them. One weekend, they visited her parents. Around the dinner table, her mother asked gently, "When will we hear little footsteps in this house?" Alara's smile faltered. Caspian reached for her hand under the table, but she withdrew before contact. The evening ended in strained politeness. On the drive home, silence filled the car like fog. Finally, Alara broke it. "I can't keep pretending." His grip tightened on the wheel. "Pretending that we're okay." He kept his eyes on the road. "Do you want me to admit we're not? What does that fix?" "It doesn't fix anything," she said softly. "But maybe admitting it is the only honest thing left." Her voice cracked on the last word, and he hated himself for not reaching across to hold her. But his hands stayed rigid, as if glued to the wheel. Back at the apartment, she packed a small bag, just a few clothes, her journal, a framed photo of them on their wedding day. Caspian watched from the doorway, his chest tight, his words trapped. "Alara," he finally whispered. She paused, her shoulders trembling. "Say something that makes me stay." His lips parted, but nothing came. Every sentence he thought of sounded hollow, inadequate. She closed the bag slowly. "That's what I thought." And with that, she walked past him, her steps heavy but resolute. The door closed gently, not slammed, but the sound echoed louder than any fight. Caspian remained frozen in the quiet apartment, the shadows stretching long across the floor. For the first time, he understood the true weight of silence, not as absence, but as finality. He sank into the chair where she had sat earlier, his hands gripping the edge of the table. For years, he had mastered control, but as the emptiness surrounded him, control meant nothing. The days after Alara left passed in a haze. Caspian went through motions, meetings, contracts, boardroom victories, but each success rang hollow. His penthouse grew colder, a space filled with possessions but stripped of presence. He called her once. She didn't answer. He typed messages and deleted them. He rehearsed apologies in the mirror, words that dissolved into silence. Pride kept him from driving to her door, but fear kept him from letting go entirely. He lived in the space between action and paralysis. Weeks later, a manila envelope arrived. His assistant placed it on his desk with a quiet, "It's from her." Caspian dismissed the assistant, staring at the envelope as if it were alive. He opened it slowly. The divorce papers lay inside, neat and official, accompanied by a single handwritten note. "I still care for you, but love shouldn't feel like drowning." The words blurred as he read them. He pressed the paper flat against the desk, his hands trembling. For a man who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts, who had bent markets, to his will, this simple note was the one thing he could not counter. He signed. The pen felt heavy, each stroke of ink cutting deeper than any deal he had ever made. When he placed the papers back into the envelope, he knew a chapter of his. Life had closed, not with shouting or betrayal, but with quiet resignation. The months that followed hardened him. He poured himself into work with ruthless precision, filling his calendar so completely there was no space left to feel. Shareholders praised his focus. Colleagues envied his control. The world believed he was thriving. But in the privacy of night, he sat by the window of his penthouse, staring at the skyline, haunted by memories. Alara's laughter at midnight, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she read, the warmth of her hand in his. He pressed his forehead against the glass, fighting the weight of emptiness that clung no matter how high he climbed. Alara, for her part, disappeared from his world. Mutual friends mentioned she had moved out of the city, taken up teaching full-time. Rumors whispered of her art shows, of her quiet resilience. Caspian never sought confirmation. Pride chained him. Fear kept him away. Yet no matter how many years passed, every anniversary date pressed against his chest like a bruise. He kept the note she had sent, the one tucked with the divorce papers, inside his desk drawer. Some nights he unfolded it, tracing the letters, wondering if love could ever be revived after being broken so completely. Time dulled the raw edges, but it never erased the truth. He had lost not just a wife, but the one person who had understood both his discipline and his hidden tenderness. And though he never admitted it aloud, a small part of him held on to something dangerous, hope. He imagined what might happen if paths crossed again, if words unsaid could finally find air. If love, though fractured, still had a heartbeat. He dismissed the thoughts in daylight, burying them beneath profit margins and contracts. But at night, when the city lights flickered against his glass walls, he allowed himself to whisper her name into the silence. Elara. The fracture had broken them, yes, but somewhere, beneath the rubble of pride and sorrow, something still lingered, an ember refusing to die. And fate, though hidden, was not finished with them. Caspian did what he had always promised himself he would do. He climbed. Titles accumulated beside his name, departments folded under his leadership. And companies returned his calls before they rang twice. He rose before dawn, reviewed markets with a clarity that felt almost surgical, and moved through corridors where hesitation was considered a flaw. His office floor sat high above the city, a horizon of glass and steel stretching as far as he could see. People used words like visionary and relentless. He built a holding company that knit subsidiaries into a single frame: logistics, tech, retail, property. Each acquisition slid into place as if the plan had always existed, waiting for his hands. When others guessed, he measured. When others feared, he timed the moment and stepped forward. Quarterly calls became performances where he spoke in calm paragraphs, and the room leaned in as if listening could change their fortunes. Journalists wrote profiles that traced his methods with admiration. Investors quoted him in memos and repeated his maxims in rooms he never entered. Yet the higher the numbers rose, the more he avoided the quiet. He filled his calendar with meetings that stretched late. He traveled between continents, never staying long enough to know the name of a driver or the meal he had just eaten. At formal dinners, rooms scented with expensive perfume and expectation, he wore a smile that looked flawless in photographs and felt foreign the second the flash faded. Partners toasted to his discipline and his nerve. He lifted his glass like a reflex and wondered why the taste never lingered. Nights alone became routine. He kept the blinds open as if the city's movement could keep him company. He answered emails while the skyline pulsed, then shut the laptop and felt the silence rise. On a shelf in his study sat a single folder he never opened, the copy of a note folded around legal pages he had signed. Sometimes his hand drifted toward it, but he stopped himself, as if touching. The past might undo the self he had constructed brick by brick. He tried to replace ache with achievement. A new headquarters with sculpted lines. A leadership retreat in the mountains where he told executives that culture outlasts strategy if you let it. He created mentorship programs, donated to schools, visited a hospital wing bearing his mother's name. He did good because doing good kept his days full and his mind in motion. There were nights when he left a meeting to stand alone in a quiet corridor. He would pinch the bridge of his nose, breathe, and tell himself he had everything he had planned. He did not ask why planning had stopped including happiness. He did not ask why every triumph came with an echo he could not trace. He kept the same routine every morning. Coffee strong, suit immaculate, shoelaces pulled tight as vows. He fastened his cufflinks and told his reflection the line everyone expected: ready. By lunch, he could close a deal that had stalled for months. By evening, he could outline a new market entry with a hand as steady as a metronome. People who worked with him said he had changed. They meant it as praise. He heard it as proof that the edges Elara once softened had hardened for good. He said little in reply. He managed instead. He had wanted to build something that lasted. He had built it, but he could not shake the sense that a door he needed remained somewhere. Behind him, closed, patient, waiting for someone brave enough to knock. Awards came with the territory. Business magazines placed him on annual covers with headlines that implied certainty where he felt none. At ceremonies he stepped to the microphone, thanked teams by name, and kept his remarks short. The applause pleased him for a moment and evaporated when he sat down. He bought an apartment close to the office, not for luxury but to reduce reasons to go anywhere but work. The space was crisp, minimal, arranged by a designer who understood restraint. Books lined the shelves, many unread. On the nightstand sat a frame with no photograph. He told himself he had not chosen an image yet. Some evenings he called his mother and listened to her ask about his health and sleep. He answered in careful lines. She knew him well enough to hear what he omitted. "Son," she said once, "you can be proud of the house you built and still want someone to turn on the light." He thanked her and changed the subject. He promoted people who taught others and refused to tolerate cruelty. The company learned to move with purpose because he did. Still, he walked from meeting to meeting aware that leadership without joy turns into performance. He could perform forever, but he wanted more than applause. He wanted a life that did not end when the lights dimmed, a room where someone answered when he said goodnight. Ilara left the city with a suitcase, a stack of journals, and a promise. To herself, build a smaller life that could still hold meaning. She found work at a neighborhood art center in a town that preferred bookstores to billboards. The classroom smelled of paper and clay. Children arrived with paint on their hands and questions in their eyes, and she discovered that guiding, small hands to color outside a line could heal parts of her she thought were beyond reach. Her apartment sat above a cafe that opened early. Every morning she woke to the quiet clink of cups below and the murmur of voices that greeted each other by name. She learned the rhythm quick, classes in the afternoon, open studio in the evening, workshops on weekends. She kept her door unlocked for neighbors who needed a place to sit and breathe. The walls filled with canvases, not precious, but sincere, fields of color that carried joy without needing explanation. She did not deny the past. She simply refused to let it dictate every moment. On her desk was a wooden box that held letters she never sent and sketches she did not show. Sometimes she opened the lid, traced a line, closed it, and returned to the present. Students pulled her forward without trying. They asked for stories, asked for patience, asked for permission to try again. She gave it over and over, and in the giving felt the ground under her steady. She visited the library on her days off, not the grand halls of the university, but a small building with sun-warmed tables and a librarian who recommended books by memory. She borrowed collections of verse, not to escape, but to remember that words can hold weight without crushing the people who carry them. She read at the window while the town moved at a human pace outside. Money was careful, never scarce. She taught extra sections when budgets tightened. Friends invited her to community dinners where everyone brought something to share. She made a stew that became her signature, the kind that tastes better on the second day. No one asked her for headlines about her life. They asked whether she was sleeping, whether her class had enough supplies, whether she would read at the open mic next month. She painted in the late hours. Music played softly, brushes clicked in jars, and color moved across canvas like breath. She did not chase mastery. She chased honesty. Sometimes the work failed. Sometimes it startled her with clarity. On the best nights she lost track of time and discovered, at midnight, that she had not thought once about what had been taken from her. There were moments when grief visited without warning. A photograph in a drawer, a passing couple, a lullaby heard through a thin wall. She allowed the ache to sit beside her, poured tea for it, and waited until it was ready to leave. The next morning she returned to class with steady hands. She made new friends, a baker who insisted she take home bread at the end of the day, a retired teacher who critiqued her canvases with kindness, a single father whose daughter learned to mix purple without turning it into brown. They built a small circle that felt like a net, sturdy enough to hold each other when days ran heavy. At the end of each month, she mailed a check to a scholarship fund under a quiet name. She never signed a note. She did not need the recognition. She wanted a young artist to feel what she felt when a door opens at the moment you most need it. One spring, the center hosted a community showcase. Students pinned paper to walls, families filled the hallway, and Ilara watched her class introduce their work. A boy who once refused to touch a brush explained how color helped him breathe. A grandmother bought her granddaughter's first canvas for $5 and hugged Ilara with gratitude. After the crowd thinned, the director pressed an envelope into her hand. "Your stipend," he said with a proud smile. On quiet Sundays, she biked to the edge of town, where a river slid beneath a small bridge. She leaned on the railing and breathed. The water asked for nothing. It kept going. She returned with pockets of smooth stones for her windowsill, reminders to stay steady. Her mother called often, asking if she was eating or needed anything. "I'm okay," Ilara would answer, and most days it was true. When it wasn't, she still said it, knowing she would be again. Love, she learned, could be present without fixing. It could sit between cities and still carry warmth. Years layered themselves quietly over their separate lives. Caspian's calendar thickened. Ilara's classes filled. They did not speak. They did not write. Yet there were days when both paused without knowing why. He in a glass elevator with a view. That swallowed the city, she in a studio speckled with color, and felt a tug with no name. Caspian's company expanded into 2 new countries in a single quarter. He negotiated a partnership that analysts had dismissed as unlikely, and the market rewarded him. At the celebration, he stood at a podium while cameras flashed. Afterward, a board member clasped his shoulder. "You've become the standard." Caspian smiled in a way that satisfied the room and left him hollow on the ride home. That night, he walked through rooms too orderly to feel lived in and stopped at the desk where the old note waited. He did not open the drawer. He poured water into a glass and stood by the window until the skyline softened into a field of lights. Success had given him altitude. It had not learned his name. Alara's life moved with quieter markers. She co-authored a small grant to replace worn brushes. She planned a mural with teenagers who argued about color until they learned to listen. She mentored a shy girl who arrived to class early each week and left late, determined to make something bright. When the mural was unveiled on a school wall, the students cheered and the principal wiped away tears. Alara stood behind them, letting the young ones take applause, hands folded, hearts steady. One evening, she hosted a workshop for adults who had postponed creativity for decades. An accountant drew for the first time since 7th grade. A nurse painted a childhood memory. A widower traced his late wife's handwriting onto a canvas and whispered, "Thank you," as if the permission had lifted a weight. Alara locked the studio afterward and sat on the floor among the easels, grateful for work that made sense in human terms. On a rare free weekend, she visited a nearby city with a friend. They wandered through a bookstore where a magazine cover caught her eye. Caspian, framed in profile, headline bold above him. She did not pick it up. She did not need to. She knew the shape of his focus, the line of his mouth when he chose resolve. Her friend followed her gaze and asked a question. She pretended not to hear. Alara suggested lunch, and the moment passed, thin as paper, sharp as a page turned too quickly. In late summer, Caspian attended a leadership forum where founders spoke about legacy. One of them said, "A company cannot love you back." The room laughed. Caspian did not. He stared at his notes until the letters blurred and heard, in some interior chamber, a small voice ask whether he had mistaken endurance for purpose. That night, he returned to his apartment and stood before the empty frame on the nightstand. He placed it flat in the drawer and closed it gently, as if admitting the vacancy were a necessary truth. Contrast defined them now, his days measured by margins, hers by faces. He made decisions that moved entire divisions. She moved one heart at a time. He could shift the value of a firm with a signature. She could steady a frightened child with a single word. Different scales, same hunger, to matter, to build something that would outlast them, to give more than they had received. Neither knew that their timelines were already leaning toward the same point. A vendor at one of Caspian's properties would soon donate supplies to Alara's center. A note of thanks would circulate through inboxes, passing briefly beneath his assistant's eyes. A speaking invitation would bring Caspian to a city near hers, schedule tight, windows brief. Small coincidences began to gather like magnets, learning each other's pull. On a cool evening, Alara closed the studio and stepped onto the street, a canvas under her arm. She paused, sensing a shift she could not name, as if the air itself had turned to face a new direction. Miles away, Caspian left a board dinner early and asked the driver to take the long route. He pressed his palm to the glass and watched neighborhoods glide past, children, with scooters, a couple sharing a bench, a shopkeeper counting tills. The world looked ordinary and, for the first time in a long time, necessary. He did not know he was moving toward the moment in the boardroom when a child's voice would halt his breath. She did not know she would stand in that doorway holding small fingers that trusted her without question. All they knew was that despite the distance, despite the years, something in both of them had refused to break. Their lives had taken different shapes, but the center had not shifted. Love, quiet and stubborn, kept its place, waiting for the hour when it would be asked to speak again. The conference room pulsed with expectation. Charts flickered across the projector, voices hushed to murmurs as assistants adjusted files. Caspian sat at the head of the table, spine straight, eyes fixed on the numbers he had already memorized. He had built an empire from discipline and foresight, and now board members waited for him to outline their next leap forward. He exuded calm. To the room, he was unshakable. Inside, his thoughts ticked like gears, each figure aligning to the next. His voice, when it came, carried the familiar weight of authority. "We will expand distribution channels by the next quarter. Implementation begins today." Pens scratched. Executives nodded. The meeting unfolded with precision, and then a sound broke through, Small, fragile, impossible. Mommy. The single word did what no market crash or hostile takeover had ever achieved. It froze him. Caspian's head lifted, eyes narrowing toward the doorway. The hum of electronics, the shuffle of papers, the cadence of corporate language, all dissolved. His gaze landed on the threshold, and time fractured. There she was, Elara. She stood framed by glass and steel, unchanged yet transformed by the years. Her presence hit him like a strike to the chest. His breath caught, the world narrowed, until only she and the child beside her remained. The girl clung to her hand, curls bouncing as she shifted shyly behind her. Wide eyes scanned the room, absorbing rows of suited men and women who stared back in confusion. Caspian barely noticed the whispers rising around the table. He was fixed on two figures, Elara and the child who had spoken that single word, the word that had detonated his composure. Mommy. Caspian's throat tightened. Elara met his gaze, her face calm but shadowed by a storm behind her eyes. She hadn't planned to interrupt. That much he knew by the quick apology in her posture, the hand resting protectively on the child's shoulder. But the interruption had happened, and nothing in the world could undo it. Executives glanced between them, puzzled. Do you? One began, but stopped when Caspian lifted a hand. His expression gave no explanation. Inside, chaos raged. He had believed she could never have children. He had carried that truth like a scar carved into him. Their divorce had sealed it. Yet here stood a girl who called Elara mother, whose features bore traces that seemed disturbingly familiar. The girl peeked out again, bold curiosity sparking in her eyes. Caspian's chest constricted, the shape of her brows, the tilt of her chin. He had seen them before, every morning, in the mirror. The projector hummed, but the room had stilled. Executives leaned back, uncertain whether they were witnessing a private mistake or a public revelation. Caspian rose slowly. His chair slid back with a scrape that sounded louder than thunder. He moved around the table, each step deliberate. His heart pounded so hard he wondered if others could hear it. Elara, he breathed, voice cracking despite years of control. Her chin lifted. Caspian, just his name, steady yet heavy with history. He stopped a few feet from her. The air seemed thin. His mind flooded with memories. Library steps, laughter, vows spoken under wooden beams. All of it surged against the sight of her standing there, holding the hand of a child who had changed everything with one word. Executives exchanged glances, some shifting uncomfortably. One cleared his throat as if to remind Caspian of the meeting still in progress. But the meeting no longer existed. The empire he had built could collapse in that moment, and he would not notice. The girl tugged at Elara's sleeve. Mommy, she whispered again, softer this time, eyes never leaving Caspian. He flinched as though struck. His gaze darted to Elara's face, demanding answers she wasn't ready to give. Excuse us, Elara said firmly, guiding her daughter back into the hallway. Caspian followed, unable to stop himself. The murmurs in the boardroom swelled, but he didn't care. He stepped into the corridor, the glass doors closing behind him, shutting out the corporate world he had mastered. Now there was only her. And the child. The corridor was wide, lined with windows that spilled afternoon light across polished floors. Elara stood in the middle, her daughter pressed close against her side. Caspian stopped a few steps away, chest heaving. For the first time in years he had no words prepared. The hallway stretched quiet, the hum of the boardroom muted behind glass. Caspian's shoes clicked once against the floor before he stopped, afraid even sound might fracture the moment. He stood before Elara as if seeing a vision conjured from memory, real but impossible. She was older, yes, but the years had not dulled her. If anything, time had given her a new strength, a calmness that reminded him of stone shaped by river water, softened yet unbreakable. Her hair fell in waves around her shoulders, her eyes holding a steadiness that defied his stare. Elara, he said again, low and rough. She didn't flinch. Caspian. He looked at the little girl clinging to her hand. His chest tightened further. She called you. He stopped himself, unable to finish. Yes, Elara replied, voice even. She's my daughter. The words slammed into him. Your daughter? His throat worked around the phrase, like it was foreign. How? You told me. It wasn't possible. We lived that truth, Elara. Her hand smoothed over the child's hair, instinctive, protective. Life doesn't always obey what doctors write down. The girl peeked up at him, studying his face with wide-eyed curiosity. Caspian saw himself there. Too much to ignore, too sharp to dismiss. His breath caught. She looks like... Don't, Alara cut in, sharper than intended. Her eyes shimmered with something unsaid. Don't finish that. He shook his head slowly, disbelief and recognition wrestling in his veins. Alara, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me she's not... Ilara's lips pressed tight. She guided her daughter a step back, as though shielding her from questions too heavy for her small ears. Caspian's hand dragged down his face. The weight of years, of silence, of missed chances pressed down. All this time. You left, you vanished, and now I see you walk through my boardroom with a child who... His voice broke. A child who might be mine. Ilara's jaw trembled, but her tone stayed measured. This isn't the place. Then where is the place? His voice rose before he could stop it. His empire had taught him to command, to demand, but this wasn't about markets or margins. This was about blood, about love buried and resurrected in a single heartbeat. Where do I go to reclaim years I didn't know I'd lost? Her eyes softened, but pain lingered there. You can't reclaim them, Caspian. The little girl tugged at Alara's sleeve again. Mommy, can we go? She whispered. Alara crouched, brushing a kiss to her temple. In a minute, sweetheart. She lifted her gaze back to Caspian. Please, not here. Not now. For a moment, all the strength he wore in boardrooms, all the steel he used to build empires, melted into raw ache. He nodded stiffly, swallowing 1,000 unspoken questions. Then tell me when... Alara hesitated, then said quietly, tomorrow. There's a cafe on Willow Street, noon. He breathed out, tension in his shoulders slackening only slightly. I'll be there. Alara stood, her hand firm around her daughter's. Without another word, she turned and walked down the hall. Caspian remained rooted, watching the small figures skip slightly to keep up with her mother. He heard the faint echo of laughter, light, innocent, devastating. When they disappeared around the corner, he leaned back against the wall, pressing his palms flat to the cold glass. For years he had silenced himself with work, convinced that silence would numb the loss. Now, in a single moment, silence felt unbearable. He thought of the child's eyes, the shape of her smile, the way Alara had said my daughter with such certainty. A hollow ache grew into a storm inside him. If she was his, he had lost years, first steps, first words, nights of comfort, mornings of discovery. If she wasn't, he had still lost Alara, the only woman he had ever loved. Neither truth offered peace. He remained there until a junior executive slipped into the hall, startled to see him so still. Sir? The board. They're waiting. Caspian pushed away from the wall, straightening his suit as though armor could hide the quake in his chest. Tell them to adjourn. I won't be back today. The young man nodded quickly, retreating. Caspian walked toward the elevators, each step heavy, each breath shallow. Inside the mirrored walls, his reflection stared back, unflinching yet hollow. For the first time in years, he saw not the CEO, not the empire builder, but the man who once stood beneath oak trees whispering promises to a woman he had believed lost forever. And now she was back, with a child, his hand clenched into a fist. Tomorrow could not come fast enough. If you were in Caspian's shoes, what would you say in that hallway? Comment below. Your voice matters in this story. The city outside Caspian's window glowed with its usual rhythm, but that night it felt like a landscape he no longer belonged to. He stood at the glass wall of his penthouse, jacket draped over a chair, tie abandoned on the floor. The reflection staring back at him wasn't the CEO who conquered markets. It was a man undone by a single word spoken by a child. He replayed the boardroom moment again and again. The way the girl's voice had broken through the machinery of business, pure and uncalculated. The way executives stared, confused, as though they had witnessed a slip in the fabric of his control. The way Alara had stood, poised, protective, unwilling to explain but unable to hide. He poured a glass of water, then set it down untouched. His appetite was gone. His mind burned with questions. Was she mine? Did Alara carry our child alone, through years I should have shared? Why had she never told me? He sat at his desk, opening the drawer where the old note remained folded, brittle from time. He read it again. I still care for you. But love shouldn't feel like drowning. The words struck differently now. Had she left to protect herself, or had she left to protect someone else? Someone small, someone fragile, someone who might carry his eyes? The thought hollowed him. He leaned back in his chair, covering his face with his hands. He had measured every risk in business, anticipated every shift in markets, but this was beyond calculation. If Leanna was his, he had missed her first laugh, her first scraped knee, the bedtime stories she would one day outgrow. He had missed her calling Daddy into a night where only Ilara answered. The losses stacked higher than any profit he had ever claimed. Sleep eluded him. He moved restlessly from room to room, the silence unbearable. He paused in the study, where awards lined the shelves, plaques, trophies, framed covers. They looked meaningless now, hollow reminders of victories that had filled empty space but never satisfied his heart. On impulse, he picked up a photograph he rarely touched, his wedding day with Ilara. Her smile lit the frame, his hand rested on hers, promise unspoken but alive in every gesture. He traced her outline with a thumb. "Why didn't you tell me?" He whispered into the quiet. But he knew why. Pride, distance, the fortress he had built around himself. He had made himself untouchable, and in doing so, unreachable. She had chosen silence because he had given her no bridge to cross. Still, anger stirred alongside sorrow. She had robbed him of choice, denied him years he could never regain. Love demanded sacrifice, yes, but did it demand erasure? Did it demand he be written out of his own daughter's life? The contradiction tore at him. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, but he also wanted to kneel before Ilara and beg for a second chance. The two impulses warred, leaving him pacing the apartment until dawn. When morning broke, he dressed with unusual care. Not the sharp armor of boardroom attire, but something quieter, an open collar, no tie, sleeves rolled slightly. He wanted to meet her not as a CEO, but as the man who had once carried her books in a library and kissed her beneath lantern light. Still, the mirror reflected tension. His jaw was tight, his eyes shadowed from sleeplessness. He looked like a man standing on the edge of an abyss, uncertain whether the fall would destroy or deliver him. The ride to Willow Street felt longer than flights across oceans. His driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror, sensing his unrest, but said nothing. Caspian stared out the window, watching the city blur, families on sidewalks. Children skipping, couples crossing streets hand in hand. Each sight cut him deeper. At the cafe, he stepped out into a softer world than he was used to. The awnings striped in faded colors, the scent of fresh bread drifting. Through the door, laughter from inside spilling onto the sidewalk. He hesitated before entering, palms damp. Ilara was already there. She sat near the window, hair tied loosely, a cup of tea steaming before her. The child, Leanna, he would soon learn, sat across, coloring with quiet focus. Crayons scattered across the table, little hands working earnestly. The sight undid him. Years of walls, of distance, of control. All crumbled as he stood frozen. Watching the life he might have known unfold casually before him, Ilara looked up. Their eyes locked, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition. Sorrow, longing, and a fragile question neither dared voice aloud. Caspian drew a breath and stepped forward. Caspian reached the table slowly, every step deliberate, as if moving too quickly might cause the scene to vanish. Ilara's eyes followed him, calm on the surface but storming beneath. Leanna, absorbed in her coloring, didn't look up until his shadow fell across the paper. Her gaze lifted, meeting his for the first time. Wide, curious, unafraid. Caspian's breath faltered. In those eyes he saw echoes of himself, reflections too clear to dismiss. His hand twitched at his side, aching to reach forward, but he held it still. "May I sit?" His voice was low, steady only by force of will. Ilara nodded once. For a little while. He lowered himself into the chair opposite her, the wooden frame creaking softly. The cafe buzzed with gentle conversation, clinking cups, the hiss of the espresso machine, but around their table, silence pressed like a dome. "She's beautiful," Caspian said, his voice barely audible. Ilara's fingers brushed her daughter's curls. "She is..." Leanna tilted her head. "Mommy, who is he?" Ilara hesitated. Her eyes flicked to Caspian, then back to her daughter. "He's someone I used to know." The words cut, though he understood her caution. Still, the ache tightened in his chest. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "What's her name?" "Leanna." The syllables landed like music, soft and lyrical. Caspian repeated it silently, tasting the shape of it in his heart. Liana offered him a crayon without ceremony. "Do you want to color?" The simplicity disarmed him. He took it carefully, the small piece of wax warm from her hand. He glanced at Alara, who said nothing, her eyes unreadable. Slowly, he bent toward the page and drew a line. His hand, so used to contracts and signatures, shook slightly, but Liana grinned. "You're good," she said. Caspian smiled faintly, the first real smile to reach his eyes in years. "Not as good as you." For a moment, the heaviness lifted, but only for a moment. Alara's voice broke the fragile peace. "Why are you here, Caspian?" His smile vanished. He set the crayon down carefully, folding his hands together. "Because I need to know the truth. I need to know if she's mine." Liana's head tilted in confusion, but Alara quickly redirected her with another sheet of paper. When the child bent over her work, Alara met Caspian's gaze, her voice low, sharp with restraint. "This isn't the place for that." "Then where is—" His words carried urgency, desperation. "I've lived years believing you couldn't, believing we couldn't, and now I see her, Alara. I see myself in her face." Alara's jaw tightened. "She's my daughter. That's all you need to know right now." His breath hitched. "That's not enough." The silence between them quivered with everything unsaid. Finally, Alara pushed back her chair slightly, signaling the end of their fragile truce. "We'll talk. Alone." But not with her listening. Caspian nodded slowly, swallowing his frustration. "When?" "Soon." It wasn't a promise. It was a boundary. Still, it was more than he had expected to receive. Liana lifted her latest page proudly. "Look, Mummy, a son." Alara smiled, smoothing the paper. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Caspian's chest ached. He had missed this, the small triumphs, the ordinary moments that carried extraordinary weight. He wondered how many more he had lost, how many more had been stolen by silence. The minutes stretched. Finally, Alara gathered her daughter's supplies. "We should go." Caspian rose as they did. His eyes lingered on Liana, then on Alara. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For letting me sit here. For letting me see her." Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. She took Liana's hand, guiding her toward the door. Caspian followed them with his eyes, his heart pulled taut between despair and fragile hope. As the door closed behind them, he sank back into the chair, pressing his palms flat against the table. For the first time in years, he felt small, human, uncertain. The cafe noise returned to him, the scrape of chairs, the hiss of steam, the laughter of strangers. But inside, his world was narrowed to a single truth. The past wasn't finished with him. He exhaled, long and trembling. Tomorrow, or the next day, Alara would speak. And when she did, everything would change. For better or worse, he was certain of only one thing: he would not let her vanish again. The corridor was quiet, in a way that absorbed sound. A cleaning cart stood parked near a bend in the hall, the soft scent of lemon clinging to the air. Alara waited by the window, phone in hand, eyes on the street below. When Caspian stepped out of the elevator, he paused, as if the sight of her required permission to breathe. "Alara," he said. She turned, the light catching the line of her jaw. "I told you we would talk," she answered. Not with her listening. "Where is she?" His voice was gentler than he intended. "With a friend in the lobby," Alara replied. "Picture books, juice. She's fine." He nodded, then closed the distance by a careful half-step. "You said we'd talk, so talk to me. I need the truth." The words hovered between them, heavy, unavoidable. Alara let out a slow breath. "Ask your questions, Caspian, one at a time." He swallowed. Years of restraint crumbled into something unsteady. "Is she mine?" Alara held his gaze without blinking. "She is my daughter." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give without making promises I can't defend in a hallway," she said quietly. "You know how I am. I measure my words." His hand tightened at his side. "You kept her from me." "I kept myself alive," Alara replied. No heat, just a statement of fact. "There's a difference." He flinched, then steadied. "How old is she?" 6. He did the math in an instant, everything aligning like a series of ledgers that added up too neatly to deny. 6, he repeated, and his breath thinned. "That would mean—" "It would mean exactly what you think it means," Alara said, her voice a touch softer. "But I won't turn this into courtroom proof. Not here, not like this." He moved to the window, pressing his palm to the cool glass, counting heartbeats so his thoughts wouldn't scatter. You told me we couldn't. You told me that door was closed for good. I was told the same, she answered. That's what made it so difficult to live with. Hope is a beautiful thing until it becomes a blade. A silence settled, dense with memory. He saw with brutal clarity the nights they had spent not speaking, the mornings they had moved around each other like careful strangers. If there was even a chance, he said, why didn't you call me? Alara's mouth curved, not a smile, more like a tremor in composure. Because the last time I reached for you, I got your voicemail and a meeting reminder. Because the man I loved was inside a citadel I no longer knew how to enter. Because I had to choose between begging for a space in your life and protecting a life that was forming inside me. I chose her. He closed his eyes, jaw tight. I would have chosen her too. Would you? She asked, not as accusation, but as a genuine question. He opened his eyes, meeting her steady look. I would have learned how. Alara looked away, blinking once. I believe you mean that now. Now is all we have, he said. I can't rewrite the past, but I can ask you to stop shutting me out of the present. She studied him for a long, unguarded moment. I'm not shutting you out. I'm opening the door carefully. That's the only way this doesn't break her. He nodded, the words falling through him like stones into deep water. Does she know anything about me? She knows I had someone I loved, that's all. She doesn't know the rest, because she hasn't asked the rest. He swallowed the ache. And if she asks, then I will tell her the truth, Alara said. Not all at once, not as a spectacle. The truth has to be kind if it's going to be carried by a child. He stepped closer. I want to be kind with it. I want to be there when it's told. Alara's hands folded, the gesture small and precise. We'll discuss how, but first we need to decide whether your place is a promise or a hope. There's a difference. He nodded again, slower this time. What do you need from me right now? Patience, she said, and proof that patience won't turn into absence. The word landed like a test he knew he had failed once before. He straightened, a fraction taller. Then give me the first step. Tomorrow, she said. We meet again. No boardrooms, no crowds, just us. And her? Not yet, Alara replied. She gets only warmth from both of us until we know how to hold this without shaking. He accepted the terms with a tight breath. Tomorrow, he echoed. They stood without speaking, neither willing to end the conversation that had taken years to begin. Down the hall, the elevator chimed. Alara glanced toward it, then back at him. There's more I need to say, she murmured. But not in a corridor. Where? He asked. You'll know when I tell you. A flicker of humor, small and fleeting, crossed her features. I haven't forgotten how to lead you where you refuse to go. He almost smiled. Almost. Lead me then. Tomorrow, she repeated, and the word felt like a hinge turning. He watched her walk away, the echo of her steps merging with the distant hum of the building. When she disappeared around the bend, he exhaled, slow, careful, like a man, surfacing from deep water, unsure how much air he was allowed to take. He did not sleep that night, not in any way that counted. He lay in the dark with memories threading themselves through thought, the chapel vows, the apartment laughter, the calendar that had once ruled their hope, the morning he signed his name and ended what felt unendable. By dawn he rose, dressed without the armor of a tie, and left the apartment before the first meeting on his calendar could claim him. They met in a quiet space off the main lobby of a hotel Alara chose. Not anonymous, not grand, just neutral ground where voices softened automatically. She was already seated, hands wrapped around a cup that had long since cooled. When he sat, she looked at him with an expression he recognized from their best days, ready to speak the hard things without cruelty. Thank you for coming, she said. You knew I would, he answered. A small nod. I did. He waited, resisting the urge to fill the air with questions. She studied him, perhaps measuring patience against urgency. Alara, he said at last, voice steady but edged. I need to know how this happened, not the science, the life. When did you realize? Her eyes steadied on his. After I left, weeks later. I had been sick and thought it was grief. It was not grief. He absorbed that, a tremor running through him. Were you afraid? Yes, she said simply, but not the way you think. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of having to prove my child's worth to a world that would demand timelines, charts, explanations. I wanted to protect her from being a case. His fingers tightened around the edge of the table. You thought I would turn her into a case. I thought you were buried under cases, she replied. Buried so deep you didn't know how to climb out. He took the hit without argument. I made that bed. We both did, Alara amended. You chased results. I chased meaning. We forgot to chase each other. A breath left him, half laugh, half sorrow. That's true. She folded her arms on the table, leaning in slightly. Here's what matters now. She is kind, curious, stubborn in ways that make me both proud and exhausted. She sings while she brushes her teeth. She asks why the moon follows the car. She can spot when someone is sad and will sit beside them without asking for anything in return. He smiled despite himself. That sounds like you. Sometimes Alara allowed. Other times she argues about bedtime with a tenacity that does not come from me. He met her eyes. That sounds like me. They both went quiet, a shared recognition passing between them like a current. He cleared his throat. Have you told anyone? About me? A few friends know there's a man who mattered once. My mother knows more. She knows your name. She also knows why I protected silence. Does she hate me? He asked. No, Alara said. She thinks you and I tried to carry something heavy with the wrong muscles. He winced at the accuracy. What do you need now, from me? Alara considered. I need you to understand that this is not about reclaiming ground. This is about building ground she can stand on without fear. If you step in, you must keep stepping. I won't explain to a child why someone vanished twice. I won't vanish, he said, the promise leaving his mouth before he could test it. I can't lose her. I won't lose you. She held up a hand. One at a time, Caspian. First, we confirm what we both think we know. Then we decide how to tell her a story that doesn't hurt. He nodded, tension thrumming like a wire. How do we confirm? There are ways, she said, neither dramatic nor evasive. Not today, not in a rush, but soon. Her gaze softened. You already feel what you feel. The proof will only give your heart permission to admit it. He looked down, fighting the surge of longing and grief that took him in a single wave. I don't know how to stand in front of 6 years and pretend I'm steady. You don't have to pretend, Alara said. You just have to stand. He let that settle. We let me see her again. Not to speak about any of this, just to be there. Yes, Alara said, under rules. Name them. You arrive when you say you will. You leave when I say we're done. No questions that force her to define you. Not yet. I agree, he said instantly. She studied him. Fast commitments used to scare me. They scare me too, he admitted. But losing more time scares me more. Something flickered in her eyes then. Recognition, the slightest warmth breaking through guarded caution. You sound like the man who gave me a blueprint and asked me to help turn it into a home. He blinked, memory tugging at the corner of his mouth. Some blueprints take longer to build. Some require better foundations, she replied. He leaned back, breath steadying. Tell me one thing I can hold today. Alara lifted her cooled cup, then set it down again, as if choosing words from a shelf where none could be wrong. Hold this, regardless of proof. Your next steps must be gentle. With her, with me, with yourself. He nodded, letting the sentence root where panic had been. Gentle, he repeated. They sat with that, a pact made of quiet rather than ink. Outside the window, the city moved at its usual speed. Inside, two people who had once lost each other agreed to stop running. They left the hotel together but not side by side. Space remained between them, intentional, careful. At the corner, Alara paused. I'll message you, she said. We'll set a time. He nodded. I'll be there. She began to turn, then stopped. There's something you need to hear before we go any further. He waited. When I found out, she said, meeting his eyes. I thought about calling you every day for a week. I wrote your number on a sticky note and moved it from mirror to desk to door. I wanted to believe you'd answer as the man who once held my hand on library. Steps, not as the executive who managed emotion like an expense. He swallowed, shame and tenderness colliding. I would have tried. I know, she said softly. But the truth is, I was afraid of your trying. Trying can look like love while still keeping distance. I needed certainty. I needed presence. I needed someone who would sit on the floor with me when I was too tired to stand. So I chose to protect her while I learned how to keep breathing. He absorbed that, the words settling like a layer of frost over old pride, cooling it. "I'm here now," he said. Floor and all. Her mouth curved, the ghost of a smile he had not seen in years. "We'll see." They parted with a nod. No grand gestures, no promises stretched beyond their weight. Caspian walked in the opposite direction, casting one glance over his shoulder. Alara didn't look back. He respected that more than he could say. That night, he prepared for the new kind of work she had named. He cleared a section of his schedule and told his assistant he would be unavailable for internal matters certain afternoons. He opened a private note on his phone and wrote a list he had never made before: books for 6-year-olds. Games that don't require screens. Questions that invite, not corner. He added another line, underlined twice: listen first. He called his mother. When she heard his voice, she knew something had shifted. "Tell me," she said gently. "I might have a daughter," he answered, the words landing between fear and reverence. Silence, then the sound of a breath held and released. "Do you love her mother still?" his mother asked. "Yes," he said, not needing to search for the answer. "Then love will ask you to walk small and steady," she replied. "Let it teach you patience." "I will," he promised. The next afternoon, Alara's message arrived. Tomorrow. Late day. Park on Juniper. Bring nothing but time. He stared at the screen, the simplest instructions carrying the weight of a new life. He responded with a single word: agreed. At the park, the sun eased toward the horizon, turning benches into long rectangles of light. Children traced the looped path on scooters and bikes. Alara sat at the edge of the playground, watching Liana attempt the climbing bars with fierce concentration. Caspian approached slowly, stopping where his shadow would not cross theirs. Liana reached the top and threw her hands up, triumphant. Alara clapped. Caspian did too, softly, the sound barely more than a breath. The child looked over, spotted him, and waved as if he had always been part of the scene. Alara gestured to the bench. "You can sit." He did, leaving room between them, hands unclasped and open on his knees. "Hi," he said to Liana when she passed by. "Hi," she chirped, already focused on the slide. They watched in companionable quiet. No questions, no labels, just the simple act of 3 people sharing the same patch of time. Caspian felt something loosen, the tight coil inside him unwinding one ring at a time. He didn't need to name anything to feel its truth. After a while, Liana tugged at Alara's sleeve. "Can we get ice cream?" Alara looked to him. "We were about to go. There's a cart near the corner." Caspian stood. "May I walk with you?" "Yes," Alara said, measured but genuine. They strolled slowly, the small figure between them hopping over cracks in the sidewalk, counting steps aloud. At the cart, Liana chose a flavor with decisive joy. Caspian paid without comment, not to impress, simply to participate. He did not try to read deeper meaning. He handed a napkin. He smiled when she dripped. He listened when she told him the best part of the park was the sway bridge because it felt like a song under her feet. On the return path, Alara slowed. "This is how we start," she said quietly. "Nothing heavy, no declarations, just time." "I can do that," he replied. She studied him, then nodded. "We'll build from here." As the sun lowered, the park lights flickered on. Alara checked the time and touched Liana's shoulder. "Home," she murmured. Liana slipped her hand into her mother's. Before they turned, she looked up at Caspian. "Are you coming back?" He felt the question anchor itself inside him. "If it's okay," he said, eyes on Alara. "It's okay," she answered. Liana grinned, satisfied. "Good." They parted at the gate. Alara gave him a look that said more than words: "Keep showing up." He answered with one of his own: "I will." On his walk back to the car, he understood what had changed. The storm inside him had not passed, but it had found a shore. He carried hope carefully now, not as a banner, but as a candle cupped against the wind. Behind him, a child's laughter rose, bright and untroubled. Ahead of him, the path bent toward a truth that had been waiting patiently for years. He did not know every detail yet. He did not need to. The hidden part of their story was beginning to lift its curtain, inch by careful inch. Enough to reveal what mattered most. Some loves, even when quieted, never leave. They wait for courage to return, for tenderness to relearn its shape, for 2 people to stand without armor and say, "We're still here." And they were. The cafe on Willow Street hummed with its usual rhythm, clinking cups, quiet chatter, the hiss of milk steaming behind the counter. Caspian sat in the corner, his hands folded tight, knuckles pale with restraint. He'd arrived early, as though punctuality might restore control to a world that no longer obeyed him. The bell over the door chimed, and Alara entered. She wore no armor, no suit, no shield of formality, just a simple blouse, hair pulled, back loosely, a kind of quiet grace that both comforted and unsettled him. She slid into the chair opposite. Between them sat untouched menus, but they both knew this meeting wasn't about food. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. He gave a sharp, almost incredulous laugh. "Alara, you walk into my life with a child, our child maybe, and you thank me for showing up? You don't have to thank me. You owe me an explanation." She didn't flinch. "I know." The restraint in her tone stilled him more than anger would have. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Tell me. All of it." Her gaze lowered briefly to her hands. When she lifted it again, her eyes carried years he had not been there to witness. "After the divorce, I left the city because I couldn't breathe in the life we had built. Every corner was heavy with what we'd lost. Every room echoed with silence. So I left, not to punish you, but to survive." He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to listen. Months later, she continued, "I began feeling sick, exhausted, dizzy. I thought it was grief. I thought it was the cost of losing everything at once, but it wasn't. I went to the doctor, and they told me what I never believed I would hear. I was pregnant." The words hit Caspian like a blow. He sat back, air leaving his lungs in a sharp exhale. "That's not possible," he whispered, almost to himself. "It shouldn't have been," Alara agreed. But medicine had changed. There were new treatments, new procedures, possibilities that hadn't existed when we were together. And somehow, against everything we believed, I conceived naturally. They called it rare. I called it a miracle. Either way, it was real. His hand trembled against the table. "And you didn't tell me." Her eyes flickered with pain. "I wanted to. Every day I wanted to. I even wrote your number on slips of paper, left them in places where I couldn't avoid them. But when I imagined calling, I saw you, your calendar, stacked, your voice brisk, your life accelerating. You had already built walls around yourself. I was afraid that if I told you, you'd give me duty, not love. And she deserved love." Caspian's fists tightened, nails biting into skin. "So, you decided for me. You erased me from her life." Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice stayed steady. "I decided to carry her without questioning her worth, to fight for her without waiting for permission. You don't know how it feels to walk into a clinic and be told the impossible happened, then realize you're completely alone. I was terrified, Caspian, but I was also determined, so I raised her, not as a secret, but as my whole world." He dragged a hand down his face, shaking his head. "All those years I thought of you, wondered where you were, what you were doing, and you were raising our daughter." His voice cracked. "You let me miss her first word, her first steps. You let me miss everything." Alara's shoulders curved inward. "I know what I took from you, and I will carry that guilt as long as I live. But at the time, I thought I was sparing her from uncertainty. I couldn't risk her. Growing up with half-presence, with promises broken because you were always called away. I wanted her foundation to be steady, even if it meant you weren't part of it." The cafe noise faded around them, reduced to a dull hum. Caspian sat rigid, fighting the wave of devastation inside him. "Does she know?" he asked finally, his voice raw. Alara hesitated. "She knows she has a father. She doesn't know his name. She doesn't know why he's not here. I told her love can look different, that sometimes parents can't be together but still care deeply. That's what she knows." His eyes burned. "She deserves more than that. She deserves the truth." "She will get the truth," Alara said firmly, but not shouted across a cafe table, not hurled at her like a verdict. She will get it carefully, gently, when the ground beneath her is strong enough to hold it. Caspian's voice dropped. "Hoarse. Alara, I need to hear it from you. No more waiting, no more riddles. Is she mine?" Her lips parted, closed, then parted again. A tear slipped down her cheek as she whispered, "Yes." The single word undid him. He sat motionless, a storm raging behind his eyes as if the world had tilted on its axis. For years he had lived with absence. Now he lived with presence too immense to contain. Alara reached for her napkin, dabbing quickly at her cheek. "I knew this moment would come. I just never knew how much it would hurt, for both of us." Caspian didn't speak at first. He stared at the wood grain of the table as if it could hold him steady. When he finally raised his eyes, there was no performance left in him. "I missed her first breath," he said, voice unsteady. "Her first smile. The night she wouldn't sleep unless someone hummed. The morning she learned her name. You carried all of it alone while I sat in rooms that cheered my forecasts." Alara folded her hands, the napkin trembling slightly. "I carried it," she answered, "but I was never truly alone. She was there. From the moment I heard her heartbeat, I wasn't empty anymore. I was afraid, yes, but fear didn't win." He swallowed. "Tell me everything." She nodded once, as if granting herself permission to open a door she had guarded for years. "The doctors didn't give me miracles wrapped in certainty. They gave me possibilities. They'd begun using new assessments and therapies since our last appointments. They spoke of rare cases where hope turned into outcomes. I didn't cling to statistics. I clung to the life inside me. I took every precaution, attended every scan, and listened when my body insisted I rest. I taught during the day and slept early because the fatigue was heavy. I ate what they told me to eat. I learned to breathe through worry." Caspian's jaw tightened. "You should not have had to do that without me." Her eyes held his. "At the time, I believed you were too far away to reach, not by miles, by habits. I'd watched you find shelter and work when things hurt. I couldn't bear to be one more project on your calendar." She deserved more than a father breaking meetings into minutes and saving what was left for her. "I needed to be certain you would show up in ways that couldn't be rescheduled." He flinched at the truth. "So you erased me to avoid disappointment." "I protected her," Alara replied, steady but soft. "I also protected what little was left of me. I had just rebuilt a bit of ground beneath my feet. I couldn't risk it collapsing under someone else's timetable." He drew a slow breath. "How was the pregnancy?" "Truly uneven," she said. "Some days felt peaceful. Some held more tests than I thought I could face. I counted kicks and kept a journal of everything the nurses wanted noted. I taught less. I painted more. My mother came often. A friend from the center drove me to appointments when I was too tired. People carried me in small ways. The world can be kind when you let it." He looked away for a moment, blinking hard. "The birth?" Her lips curved with a fragile memory. "She arrived small but fierce. The room filled with voices giving instructions I barely heard. I remember her cry first, thin, determined. They placed her against me, and time softened. I whispered her name and promised I would never let her feel like she was not wanted. I meant it with everything I had." Caspian pressed his palm flat to the table. "I should have been there." "I know," Alara said. "Telling you now doesn't undo what you missed, but it tells you who she is, how she began." He forced himself to keep listening. "What were those first months like?" "Loud and tender," she said, the faintest smile lifting her voice. "She woke hungry and slept in short bursts. I learned to swaddle. I learned which lullabies worked and which didn't. I kept a list of firsts. First time she tracked light. First time she laughed with her whole body. First time she sat without help. When the fear rose, I remembered the scan where the nurse squeezed my hand and said, 'She's strong.' That sentence carried me." He wet his lips, trying to steady the storm in his chest. "Did she ever ask about me?" "Not at first," Alara said. But as her world widened, she asked gentle questions. "Do I have a daddy?" I told her yes, that love can take different forms, that sometimes the people who made you aren't in the same home, but they still want good for you. I wouldn't let the story make her feel less. Our story had to hold her with care, even if it hurt me. Caspian leaned in, eyes glossy. "You spoke about me with kindness." "She deserves a kind world," Alara replied. "That begins with the truth told gently." He exhaled, unsteady. "I am angry," he admitted, surprising himself with the simplicity of it. "Not at her, not even only at you. At the version of me that made you believe calling was pointless at the years I cannot touch. At the man who could command 1,000 people and still fail to reach the one who mattered." Alara's gaze softened. "I am angry too. At doctors who spoke in absolutes, at the silence we both accepted, at the love we let grow thin. But anger isn't the ground we give her. We give her steadiness." He nodded, letting the words settle. "Steadiness," he echoed. "Tell me what that looks like now." "It looks like presence without pressure," she said. "You enter her days slowly. You earn her trust with small promises kept. You let her set the rhythm of questions. When she asks for more, we give more. When she needs less, we honor that. You learn her world before you try to place yourself at the center of it." He listened as if each instruction were a step cut into stone. "I can do that. Then we begin," Alara said. With care, Caspian sat back, trying to breathe past the weight on his ribs. "One more thing," he said, voice fragile. "Do you regret not telling me sooner?" Her answer came without hesitation. "I regret the pain it caused you. I don't regret protecting her until I knew I could trust what would come next." He closed his eyes for a heartbeat. When he opened them, he looked smaller, human in a way he rarely allowed. "I will carry what I missed, but I will not miss what comes." Alara nodded. "Good. That is the only way forward." The weight of her confirmation lingered between them like a second presence at the table. Caspian sat with his hands clasped, head bent slightly forward, as though bracing against a storm that had already broken. When he finally spoke, his words came rough. "So every smile she's given, every scraped knee, every bedtime story, they all happened without me. And now I'm supposed to, what? Step in like I was never absent?" Alara didn't retreat from the bluntness. "You step in as you are now, not as a replacement for the years gone. You cannot rewrite them, but you can be present in the years still waiting." His eyes flashed with grief. "But how do I live with what I lost? Do you know what it feels like to measure life in quarterly reports while somewhere? Your daughter learns to walk, and you don't even know she exists?" Her fingers tightened around the edge of her cup. "Yes," she whispered. "I do. Because while you were climbing higher, I was wondering if you would ever forgive me if you found out. Every day I watched her grow, I felt the shadow of what you weren't there to see. Raising her brought joy, but it also carried guilt." The tension in his jaw softened, though the ache didn't leave. "Why didn't you trust me to love her?" Her eyes closed briefly, then opened, steady. "Because I didn't trust you to love me enough to choose her first. You were already giving yourself to a world that applauded every win. I didn't want her to be one more competition for your attention. She deserved to be the center of someone's world. So I gave her mine." The words carved through him. He wanted to argue, to defend, but the memories betrayed him. Nights. He chose spreadsheets over conversation. Mornings he left before dawn. He had lived as if love could wait for the right hour on his calendar. Alara had been right. There had always been something louder than the silence between them. He drew a hand across his face, voice breaking. "She's mine." "Yes," Alara said quietly. "She is." The truth landed like a stone in still water, rippling through everything he thought unchangeable. He let the silence stretch, steadying himself. "I need to know her, not as a visitor, as her father." Alara leaned forward, her expression resolute. "Then you earn that place. Not through declarations, not through wealth, through constancy. You show up, you listen, you learn her rhythms. She will let you in if you let her lead." He nodded slowly, determination firming in his features. "I will." Her eyes softened, though caution remained. "You don't get to erase the years, but you do get to add new ones. Make them count." He swallowed hard, the truth settling into his bones. "I will." A long pause followed, heavy but no longer hostile. The noise of the cafe returned faintly, the scrape of a chair, the hiss of foam. For the first time since she had sat down, Caspian unclenched his hands. "What's her favorite book?" he asked suddenly. Alara blinked, then smiled faintly. "She loves The Secret Garden. She insists on reading the same chapter until she can recite it." He smiled too, though it trembled. "That sounds like her mother." "She has pieces of both of us," Alara admitted. "Curiosity and stubbornness, warmth and intensity. She carries our history without knowing it." Caspian's chest tightened. "Does she know her name means light?" "She does," Alara said, "and she asks me often if she really shines." I tell her yes, always yes. He looked down, fighting a surge of emotion. "I want to tell her that myself." "You will," Alara promised, "but gently, one day at a time." The waitress arrived, setting down 2 cups neither of them had ordered. "On the house," she said with a smile. Neither moved to drink. Caspian stared into the untouched coffee, then back at Alara. "You've carried this secret for 6 years. Now you've given it to me. What do we do with it?" Her answer came without hesitation. "We protect her. We build trust between us before we ask her to carry more truth than she can understand. We stay steady, even when it's hard. That's how this doesn't break her." He nodded, slow and deliberate. "Then that's what we do." Their eyes locked, not as they had in courtrooms of the past, but as parents bound by something greater than pride. For the first time, the silence between them didn't feel like distance. It felt like ground waiting to be walked carefully, together. Alara reached for her cup, finally lifting it. "To Lyanna," she said softly. Caspian raised his as well, hand trembling. "To our daughter." They drank in quiet, each lost in thought, but the weight that lingered wasn't just sorrow. It was possibility, fragile, uncertain, but alive. Outside, the street carried on as if nothing had changed. Inside, two people sat across from each other, carrying a truth that had reshaped everything. The past was heavy, yes, but the future, unwritten, waiting, had begun. The park became their first neutral ground. Caspian arrived early, taking a bench beneath the old oak tree where he could see the playground without intruding. He had dressed simply, no sharp suit, no polished armor, just a plain shirt and rolled sleeves. He wanted to be approachable, not the figure whose name echoed in boardrooms. Alara appeared minutes later, holding Lyanna's hand. The little girl skipped, her curls bouncing, her laughter rising above the chatter of other children. Caspian's heart clenched. For 6 years he had missed that sound, and now it filled the air like a melody he hadn't realized he had been waiting for. "Hi," Lyanna said brightly when she spotted him. "Hi," he answered, voice roughened by the weight of the moment. "Ready for the swings?" She nodded eagerly. Alara smiled faintly, releasing her hand. "Go on," she encouraged. Caspian rose, following her to the swing set. He placed his hands gently on the chains, giving a careful push. The swing creaked, Lyanna squealed, and for the first time in years Caspian laughed without forcing it. "Higher," she shouted. He hesitated, then pushed a little harder. The wind lifted her curls, and her laughter soared with her. Alara watched from the bench, her eyes softened by a memory of another time, when Caspian had made her laugh in the library by pretending to lose his balance carrying too many books. When Lyanna grew tired, she hopped off and ran to the slide. Caspian lingered nearby, letting her climb and descend as though it were the grandest feat. Each time she landed, she looked for his reaction, and each time he clapped or smiled, her grin widened. Alara approached, standing beside him. "You're good with her," she murmured. His throat tightened. "I should have been here all along." Her expression softened. "You're here now." They fell into a quiet rhythm. Caspian offered to buy ice cream, and when Lyanna smeared chocolate on her cheek, he laughed and handed her a napkin. She giggled, unconcerned by the mess, delighted instead by his attention. Later, they sat on the grass together. Lyanna showed him her favorite skipping game, counting aloud as she jumped between chalk squares. Caspian joined her, awkward at first, then freer as her laughter urged him on. Alara watched, arms crossed but lips curved, the sight both foreign and familiar. As the sun lowered, Lyanna plopped down between them, holding their hands without hesitation. Caspian's heart caught. It was such a simple gesture, but it bridged years of distance in an instant. "Tell me a story," she demanded. Caspian glanced at Alara, who gave a small nod. He cleared his throat, then began. "Once, a very determined girl decided to climb the tallest tree in the park. Everyone said she couldn't, but she tried anyway. She scraped her knee, got dirt on her dress, but she kept climbing. Do you know what happened?" Lyanna leaned closer. "What?" She made it to the top. And from there, she saw the whole world waiting for her. Because sometimes the world tells you no, but your heart says yes. Lyanna clapped, delighted. "That's me. I'd climb the tree." Caspian smiled, the ache in his chest easing. "I believe you would." Alara's eyes glistened. She remembered the man who had once whispered encouragement to her when she doubted. Her art, the one who believed persistence could outlast impossibility. The evening closed with Lyanna tugging both of them toward the park gates. Caspian walked beside Alara, their daughter's small hand clasped between them. It was the first time in years they moved in step, the rhythm almost natural. At the gate, Alara paused. "She'll want to see you again." "I'll be here," Caspian promised. Alara searched his face for signs of hesitation but found none. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope, not for instant reconciliation, but for the possibility of building something steady. If this story touches you, share it with a friend who believes in second chances. Caspian kept his promises small and precise. He arrived when he said he would, left when Alara signaled it was time, and never pushed beyond what Lyanna offered. The first weekday afternoon, he waited outside the art center with a paperback. tucked under his arm, the children's novel Alara said was her favorite at 6. Liana burst through the doors with blotches of blue on her fingers and a streak of yellow near her chin. "You brought a book?" she asked, delighted. "I did." "Chapter 1? He offered. They found a bench not far from the entrance. Alara chatted with a parent inside, while he read in a steady, gentle voice. He paused often to let Liana ask questions. She pointed to a sentence and said, "Why is the garden locked?" He answered, "Sometimes doors stay closed until you find the right key." She nodded gravely, satisfied with an answer that honored her curiosity. When Alara emerged, she didn't interrupt. She listened from a few steps away, watching as Caspian let silence do as much work as the words. He no longer rushed to the end of paragraphs the way he once rushed to the end of meetings. He let the story breathe. In the afternoons, they built tiny cities with wooden blocks on the living room rug. Liana designed arches taller than the box suggested. When they collapsed, she frowned and started over. Caspian did not rescue the project. He asked, "What did you try last time?" She explained, then tried again, this time with a wider base. When the arch held, she cheered and flung her arms around his neck with spontaneous affection. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, holding the moment with care, not possession. Once, Alara stepped into the kitchen to make tea and heard them practicing a handshake they invented on the spot, 2 taps, a spin, a gentle knuckle knock. Liana declared it official. Caspian saluted as if he had received a medal. Alara smiled to herself at the sink, surprised by tears that felt more like release than sorrow. Not every visit was smooth. One evening, Liana grew quiet near bedtime and refused to choose a story. "I miss Mommy," she murmured, even though Alara was across the room. Caspian considered stepping back, afraid he had overstepped by staying late. Alara shook her head gently, giving him room. He moved to the floor, sitting at Liana's level. "Sometimes new is tiring," he said. "We can stop." She studied him. "Will you come back?" He answered without flinch, "Yes." She nodded, climbed into Alara's lap, and exhaled. He and Alara began to speak in low tones while Liana built towers or drew. They did not dissect the past, they negotiated the present. "She likes clear endings to activities," Alara said quietly. "Transitions are easier if we set a timer." He began carrying a small watch and asked, 3 more minutes or 5, letting Liana choose and therefore own the shift. Tantrums never vanished entirely, but they eased. One Saturday, Alara suggested a library trip. It felt fitting to stand again among shelves at the start of something new. Liana darted between children's displays, while Caspian and Alara paused in the aisle where poetry lived. He touched the spine of a familiar book and said, "You read that to me the night before our finals." She laughed softly. "You fell asleep after 3 stanzas. Only because I trusted you to remember the rest," he answered, and the line made both of them quiet. They checked out a stack of picture books and a slim volume of verse for later. At the checkout desk, the librarian issued Liana her first card. She beamed, signed her name in careful letters, and announced, "I'm a member." Caspian clapped as if she had graduated. They added small rituals. On walks, Liana collected smooth stones for her windowsill. Caspian carried a folded paper bag just for the rocks, a courtesy so small Alara almost missed it. After dinner, he washed dishes while Liana dried. He listened to her chatter about school without interrupting to correct or explain. He learned the names of her friends and remembered them. The next week he asked, "How did Ava like the new art set?" Liana lit up. "You remembered." Every step might have looked ordinary to someone else. To them, each held the weight of years. Alara's trust did not appear suddenly. It grew. She noticed the way he asked permission before picking Liana up, the way he crouched to her level, the way he did not use gifts to buy affection. When he brought a kite, he chose the simplest one. When the wind failed, he didn't push disappointment away with a joke. He said, "We'll try again when the sky is ready," and they did, days later, in a steady breeze that finally arrived. On a quiet evening after Liana fell asleep, Alara and Caspian stood on the balcony outside her room. The city sounded distant. She said, "You're different." He met her eyes. "I'm learning." "From her?" "From both of you," he said. She considered that, then nodded. "It shows." He hesitated and then asked, "Do you ever regret telling me?" Alara shook her head. "She deserves her whole story. You deserve the chance to live the part that's left." He absorbed the mercy in that sentence like a parched man finding water. Before he left, Liana stirred and called, "Is he still here?" Alara opened the door a crack. "He's by the kitchen," Liana whispered. "Tell him good night." Caspian stepped to the doorway, hand on the frame. "Good night, Liana." Her voice floated back, already drifting. "Good night." He walked to the elevator with a feeling he could not name, something steadier. Then euphoria, quieter than grief, belonging earned, not granted. When the doors closed, he saw his reflection and barely recognized the expression. It wasn't the face the magazines printed. It was a father's face, new and true. He breathed, steady. The following weekend, Caspian arrived with no briefcase, no phone pressed to his ear. He carried only a picnic basket Alara had suggested they fill together. Liana bounced excitedly as he entered, pointing to the blanket already folded at the door. "We're going to the meadow," she announced, as if he were the guest of honor. The meadow was nothing grand, just an open stretch of grass at the edge of the park where families gathered to fly kites or sprawl under the open sky. Yet to Caspian, it felt like a stage for something sacred. They laid the blanket down, unpacked sandwiches and fruit, and sat close without calculation. Liana darted off to chase butterflies, shrieking with delight. Caspian watched her run, arms flung wide, a figure of joy untamed. "She's fearless," he murmured. "She's careful too," Alara said. "She looks back every few steps." Sure enough, Liana glanced toward them, confirming they were still there. Caspian's heart swelled. "She needs to know she's not alone," he said. Alara looked at him, something tender flickering across her face. "Exactly." Later, Liana insisted they play a game of pretend. She declared herself queen of the meadow, Caspian her knight, and Alara her wise counselor. He dropped to one knee with surprising ease, swearing to defend her kingdom against invisible dragons. Liana squealed, showering him with imaginary medals. Alara laughed, the sound carrying across the grass. It wasn't the kind of laughter polished for social gatherings. It was real, the laughter Caspian had missed most. He felt a tug in his chest, a reminder of the woman he had loved long before titles and skyscrapers shaped his life. When Liana collapsed onto the blanket, tired from running, Caspian offered her a bottle of water. She leaned against him naturally, her curls brushing his arm. Alara watched carefully, but not with resistance. She saw the ease forming between father and daughter, a rhythm she hadn't dared believe possible. As Liana drifted into a nap, Caspian lowered his voice. "She trusts quickly." "She trusts because she feels safe," Alara replied. "And she feels safe because you've been steady." He absorbed the affirmation, surprised at how much it meant. For years he had been measured in profit. Now he was being measured in presence. And for the first time, he liked the scale. They sat in quiet for a while, the meadow buzzing with other families. At last, Caspian spoke. "Do you remember our old dream? The house with a small garden where you'd paint and I'd read reports on the porch?" Alara smiled faintly. "I remember. We traded it for silence and distance." "I traded it," he corrected gently. "You wanted the dream. I wanted the world. And in chasing the world, I lost both." Her gaze lingered on him, cautious but softened. "Do you want it again?" "Yes," he said simply. "Not the garden, not the porch, the life with you, with her." Alara's eyes glistened. "It isn't as simple as wanting. Trust doesn't return on command." "I know," he admitted, "but I'll wait as long as it takes. I'll prove it one steady day at a time." Liana stirred then, blinking sleepily. "Did the dragons go away?" "Yes," Caspian said, brushing a curl from her forehead. "Your knight took care of them." She smiled drowsily. "You're good." Her simple words struck deeper than any boardroom praise. Caspian looked at Alara, who held his gaze for a long moment. She didn't speak, but the quiet between them no longer felt like distance. It felt like the fragile beginning of trust reborn. That evening, Caspian walked them home. Liana skipped ahead, humming a tune she had made up on the spot. Caspian and Alara walked slower, their steps falling into rhythm. At her door, Alara hesitated. "Today was good," she said softly. He nodded. It was more than good. She studied him. "Keep showing up. Keep letting her set the pace. That's how we'll know this isn't fleeting." "I will," he said, voice steady. For a moment, silence stretched, but this time it felt charged with possibility. Caspian wanted to reach for her hand, but he held back, honoring the pace she had named. Inside, Leanna called, "Mommy, come see my drawing." Alara smiled faintly. "Good night, Caspian." "Good night," he answered, his heart aching with both longing and gratitude. As he walked away, he carried the sound of Liana's laughter and the image of Alara's smile like treasures more valuable than any empire. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. But for the first time in years, he welcomed the challenge, not as a CEO but as a father, and as a man who still loved. It began with small things, not declarations, not sweeping gestures, just the quiet rhythm of shared evenings. One night after Liana had gone to bed, Caspian lingered on the balcony. The city stretched below, its lights glittering like scattered embers. Alara stepped outside carrying 2 cups of tea. She offered him one, the steam curling between them. "Thank you," he said softly. They stood side by side, sipping in silence. The air wasn't heavy, nor was it casual. It was something in between, a place where words weren't required but presence mattered. Alara finally spoke. "You've changed." He turned to her, brow lifting. "How so?" "You listen longer," she said. "You don't rush to fix. You let silence live." He smiled faintly. "I had to learn that the hard way." She studied him, then nodded. "It shows." The next evening, when he returned Liana's forgotten jacket, they ended up talking in the kitchen after the child was asleep. They spoke of ordinary things, her art students, his favorite book as a boy, but the ordinariness itself was precious. It was the first time in years they had shared conversation without strain. As weeks passed, the distance between them softened. He would catch her glancing at him when Liana laughed, as though she were measuring whether the man beside her truly was the same one she had once known. She noticed how carefully he folded Liana's drawings to keep them neat, how he carried her backpack without being asked. One evening, after a long day, Alara rubbed her temples. Caspian noticed. Without a word, he filled a glass of water and set it by her elbow. She blinked, surprised. "You remembered. You used to get headaches when you painted too long," he said. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again, as though the memory caught her off guard. "I didn't think you noticed back then." "I noticed everything," he replied quietly. The words lingered between them, soft but powerful. Another night they found themselves walking home from the park while Liana skipped ahead, singing. The street lamps glowed above them. Caspian matched his pace to Alara's, his hand brushing hers lightly. Neither pulled away. The touch was brief, unspoken, but it carried the weight of a history unfinished. Later, when Liana was tucked into bed, Alara joined him in the living room where he was flipping through one of her old sketchbooks. "You kept these," he said, awe in his tone. "Of course," she answered. "They're pieces of me. They're beautiful," he murmured, turning the pages with reverence. Her eyes softened. "You never said that before." "I didn't know how," he admitted. "But I see it now." The clock ticked quietly. They sat close, their shoulders brushing, neither moving away. The air grew charged, but not with urgency. It was the calm of 2 people relearning how to be near each other without fear. That night, when Caspian left, Alara stood at the door longer than necessary, watching him walk down the hall. She pressed her fingers lightly to her lips, as though reminding herself to breathe. Their intimacy was not a rush, it was a return. It grew from late-night conversations, from shared silences, from the rediscovery of small gestures. It was not the passion of youth burning fast, but the warmth of embers carefully stirred back to flame. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table with mugs of tea, Caspian leaned forward, his voice steady. "Alara, do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had stayed? If we had fought harder?" Her gaze fell to her hands. "I wonder. But wondering doesn't change the past. What matters is whether we can shape what comes next." He nodded. "I want to. With you." She lifted her eyes, vulnerability shining through. "I don't know if I can trust us yet." He reached across the table, brushing his fingers lightly over hers, not gripping, not demanding, just offering. "Then let me earn it, slowly. No promises made in haste, just steady proof." She didn't pull away. Her hand remained under his, still, accepting. For the first time in years, the distance between them no longer felt impossible. It felt like a bridge beginning to rebuild, plank by careful plank. The shift from cautious warmth to undeniable closeness came gradually, woven through small nights that seemed ordinary to anyone else but monumental to them. One evening, Alara invited Caspian to stay after dinner. Liana had fallen asleep early, worn out from a day at the art fair. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the clock. They sat on the couch, shoulders angled toward each other, a blanket folded neatly between them. Caspian spoke of his childhood, stories he had rarely told, how he had once built a paper plane that flew out of the schoolyard and into traffic, how he had hidden library books under his pillow so he could read by the faint light slipping under the door. Alara listened, smiling, hearing the boy she had fallen in love with hidden beneath the man the world saw. "You never told me that," she said, amused. "I didn't think it mattered," he admitted. "It matters," she replied gently. "The small things always do." The way she said it loosened something inside him. For years he had believed success was built on monumental acts, yet here she was, reminding him that intimacy grew from moments too small for headlines. Another night, after Leanna's bedtime, they found themselves on the balcony again. The air was cool, the city lights steady. Caspian leaned against the railing, while Alara stood a step away. Their conversation slipped into silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was full, alive. Without planning, he reached for the blanket draped over the chair and set it over her shoulders. She startled slightly, then gave him a look that carried both gratitude and hesitation. "You always did that," she said softly. "What?" "Noticing when I was cold." He smiled faintly. "Some things don't change." Her eyes lingered on his face. "Some things do. You, for example." He wanted to ask if that was good or bad, but instead he said, "I'm trying to be better." "I see it," she admitted. The night carried them deeper into memory. They spoke of the library where they met, the first time they had argued over, paint colors, the nights they had stayed up late dreaming of what might be. Each story came with laughter and pauses, with glances that stretched longer than before. At one point, a silence fell, heavy but tender. Caspian turned toward her fully. "Alara," he said, voice low, "I never stopped loving you. Not once." Her breath caught. For years, she had buried her heart beneath practicality, convincing herself love was a chapter closed. Yet now, his words cracked the seal she had so carefully set. "You can't just say that after everything," she whispered. "I don't say it lightly," he answered. "I say it because it's the truth that carried me through every empty night. And if I have a chance to love you again, I'll take it, slowly, carefully, the way you deserve." Her hands tightened on the blanket. She looked at him, searching for the man who had once chosen work over warmth. But all she saw was a man who had learned, who had been broken, who now stood ready not to conquer but to cherish. The air thickened with unspoken words. Caspian hesitated, then asked softly, "May I?" Her heart raced. "May you what?" "May I kiss you?" It had been years since those words had passed his lips, yet they came with reverence now, as if the act itself required permission not just from her, but from the history they shared. Alara's breath trembled. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she nodded. Caspian leaned closer, careful as if she were porcelain he might break. Their lips met, not in the fiery rush of youth, but in the quiet surrender of two souls that had weathered storms apart and now found safe harbor together. It was gentle, lingering, a kiss that spoke of forgiveness, of longing, of promises unspoken. When they parted, Alara's eyes shimmered. "It feels different," she murmured. "It is different," he said. "It's stronger because it survived." They stayed close, foreheads touching lightly, neither rushing the moment. The kiss had not solved everything, nor erased the years of pain, but it had carved a path forward, fragile and real. In the nights that followed, intimacy grew like a garden tended carefully. Caspian learned when to reach for her hand and when to let it rest. Alara allowed herself to lean against his shoulder during quiet talks. They did not rush to labels or vows. They let the nearness itself be enough. Once, when Leanna stumbled sleepily into the living room after a bad dream, Caspian lifted her gently and carried her back to bed. Alara followed, watching as he tucked the blanket around their daughter with surprising ease. Leanna clutched his hand, sighed, and drifted back to sleep. Alara felt her heart swell, a knot inside her loosening. Back in the hall, she whispered, "You belong here." Caspian looked at her, eyes filled with gratitude. "If you'll have me." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took his hand in hers, squeezing lightly. "We'll see where this leads. But tonight, yes." The journey of love reborn did not roar. It whispered. In touches, in looks, in words spoken under the hush of night. But it was enough to remind them both that love, once fractured, could be stitched back together, not perfectly, but beautifully. The contract lay on the polished table, heavy with expectation. Numbers stretched across the page, like promises written in ink, carrying the weight of expansion, prestige, and another mountain conquered. Around Caspian, executives whispered, their eyes bright with anticipation. Cameras waited outside, journalists poised to celebrate the man who could close the largest deal of the decade. Caspian sat at the head of the table, pen in hand, but his gaze drifted, unfocused. The words on the document blurred, transforming into something he couldn't hold. The voices of his advisors washed over him like static. Phrases about shareholder, approval, projections, global influence, but none of it anchored. Instead, he thought of Leanna's laughter when the kite finally caught the wind. He thought of Alara's soft nod when she admitted she saw the change in him. And most of all, he thought of the drawing tucked in his briefcase, 3 figures holding hands. Beneath a bright yellow sun, the words "my family" scrawled across the top in uneven letters. He pressed the pen against the paper, but didn't sign. His hand trembled slightly. "Mr. Vera?" One of the board members prompted. "Everything is prepared. All that's left is your signature." Caspian straightened in his chair, forcing composure. "Remind me again," he said slowly. "How long will this contract keep me overseas?" The legal advisor leaned forward. "Minimum of 3 years, possibly 5, depending on the partnership phases. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." A ripple of agreement circled the table. Heads nodded, eyes gleamed. Caspian's stomach tightened. 3 years, maybe 5. Leanna would grow from a child into a young girl in that time. He would miss bedtime stories, school projects, laughter echoing through the park. He would miss Alara's guarded smiles as they slowly transformed into trust. He would miss everything he had just begun to rebuild. He set the pen down, exhaling sharply. "Mr. Vera?" The advisor pressed again, confusion flickering. Caspian's gaze swept the room. The men and women before him looked at him with the same hunger he had once carried, hunger for dominance, for records broken, for empires built. He had worn that hunger like armor. Now, it felt like a weight that no longer fit. "I need a moment," he said. He rose, ignoring the startled looks, and stepped into the corridor. His footsteps echoed, each one striking with the force of his own unrest. He loosened his collar, tugged at the knot in his chest. He could hear his daughter's voice in memory. "You're good." He could see Alara's face, cautious but softening. At the end of the hallway, he stopped, pressing a hand to the wall. He closed his eyes and pulled the drawing from his briefcase. The paper was wrinkled at the edges, but the colors were bright. He traced the little hands she had drawn, one larger, one smaller, and one his own. It was simple, childlike, yet it held more weight than the billion-dollar contract behind him. He realized, with sudden clarity, that success had never been about numbers. It had always been about belonging. And for the first time, he understood what he truly wanted to belong to. His chest tightened with both fear and freedom. He turned and walked back toward the boardroom, his stride steady. The decision had already been made. When he entered, the room fell silent. Every eye fixed on him, waiting for the gesture that would secure the deal. He returned to his seat, the contract before him once more. "I've reviewed every figure," he said calmly, "and I know what this contract would bring, but I've also reviewed something more important." He unfolded the drawing and set it on the table for all to see. Murmurs spread instantly. "This," he continued, "is my future. Not that—" Confusion rippled through the executives. "Sir, with all respect," one began, "this is unprecedented." "You're right," Caspian interrupted. "It is, and it's exactly what needs to happen." He closed the briefcase, leaving the pen untouched. Gasps circled the room as he rose to his feet. For years, his life had been defined by signatures that reshaped industries. Now the most powerful act was refusal. Without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving silence in his wake. The corridor outside the boardroom swallowed the noise behind him. Caspian's footsteps struck a steady rhythm as he moved away from the deal that would have crowned his career. A junior associate hurried after him, eyes wide. "Sir, are you certain? Legal is asking whether this is a pause or a refusal." "It's a decision," Caspian said, not breaking stride. The associate faltered, then nodded and retreated. By the time the elevator doors closed, messages had already begun to appear on his phone, advisors, partners, two rival executives who somehow knew within minutes. He switched the screen off and slid the phone into his pocket. For once, the silence felt like freedom rather than absence. Downstairs, his driver stepped forward. "Back to the office, Mr. Vera?" "No," Caspian answered. He paused, measuring what mattered. "Take me to Juniper Park." The car merged into traffic. Outside the window, the city moved with its usual vigor, but Caspian felt strangely still. He could sense the storm building behind him, calls from the press, questions from the board, a committee meeting forming even now to discuss contingencies. He did not resent them. They were doing what he had trained them to do, protect the company's momentum. But today, momentum was not his measure. He thought of Liana's drawing. He had seen countless logos, floor plans, product mock-ups, and yet nothing had rearranged his priorities the way that paper had. 3 figures beneath a sun. No strategy deck could compete with that clarity. At the park, he asked the driver to wait and walk toward the open field where he and Liana had flown the kite. The air carried the smells of grass and distant street food. Children shouted, shoes thudding lightly over packed earth. He stood for several minutes with his hands in his pockets, breathing, letting the decision settle into muscle and bone. He was not running from something. He was moving toward someone. His phone vibrated again. This time he answered. It was the chair of the board. "Caspian, we need alignment. The partners are alarmed. Is this salvageable?" "It isn't," he said calmly. "Not for me." A beat of incredulity. "You're walking away from the largest contract we've ever attempted." "I'm choosing a different one," he replied. "A lifelong one." Silence. Then a careful tone. "Is this about your personal situation?" "It's about my future," he said, unruffled. "If the board needs a rationale, leadership continuity remains intact. We have successors ready. You can complete a modified deal without me, or pivot. But I won't be the one who signs away the next 5 years." Another silence, longer this time. "The market will react." "It will," Caspian agreed. "Manage it. That's why we built depth." "Are you resigning?" the chair asked finally. "I'm transitioning. Effective immediately, I'm stepping back from day to day. I'll support a clean handover." "You're serious?" "I am." He softened his tone. "This company can thrive without me. My family cannot." When the call ended, he expected fear to bite at him. It didn't. In its place was a steady calm he hadn't felt in years. He texted Alara. "Are you at home?" Her reply came a minute later. "Yes." "Is everything okay?" "I chose us," he wrote. "May I come by?" There was no answer for 30 seconds that felt longer. Then, "Come." On the drive, his assistant called twice. He let it ring and then sent a short message to the executive team. "I'm initiating succession per the contingency plan. Meeting tomorrow to formalize. Thank you for your trust." He added one more line, 4 words that surprised even him as he typed them. "Take care of people." At Alara's building, he paused outside her door, rehearsing nothing. When she opened it, he saw the question in her eyes before she spoke. "What happened?" "I walked out," he said. Not impulsively, deliberately. He met her gaze and didn't look away. 3 years overseas, maybe 5. I couldn't sign it and tell myself I was choosing you both at the same time. She leaned a shoulder against the doorframe, studying him. "You walked away from a world that applauds you. I walked toward a world that needs me," he corrected gently. Something softened in her face. "What will your board do?" "They'll adjust. They're built to." He exhaled. "I am not the only axis." Alara stepped aside. "Come in." Liana sat at the table with scissors and glue, building a collage of magazine cutouts. "Hi," she chirped. "Want to help me make a sun?" Caspian's voice warmed. More than anything, he sat across from her. Together, they chose circles of yellow paper, strips that could be rays. He held the glue while she arranged the shapes with intense focus. Alara watched from the counter, hands wrapped around a mug, expression unreadable but gentled. When the sun was finished, Liana pressed it flat with both palms, then held it up for inspection. "Bright enough?" she asked. "Bright enough to light a room," Caspian said. "Even a big room." She insisted. "Even the biggest," he assured her. Later, while Liana rinsed glue from her fingers, Alara spoke quietly. "There will be consequences." "Yes," he said, "but not regrets." Alara looked at him for a long time, as if testing the truth of the sentence against the man before her. You changed the kind of weight you carry. I did, he replied. He glanced toward the hallway where small footsteps padded, then back to Alara. It feels right. Liana reappeared, hands clean, eyes bright. Can we read? We can, Caspian said, already reaching for the book on the side table. He settled onto the couch. Liana climbed between them, as if the space had been made for exactly this purpose. Alara sat on the other side, close but not touching. Caspian opened to the first page and began to read, his voice steady, unhurried. By the third chapter, Liana's head had found a place against his arm. By the fifth, she looked up and asked, Will you be here tomorrow? He felt Alara's eyes on him. Yes, he said, without looking away from his daughter. I will. After the story, Alara walked him to the door. You know this changes everything, she murmured. I'm counting on it, he answered. She reached for the doorknob, then paused. Thank you for choosing us. He shook his head gently. Thank you for letting me. He stepped into the hall, leaving the weight of old expectations behind like a coat he no longer needed. Inside the apartment, the paper sun lay drying on the table, its rays spreading outward, touching every corner of the room. The next morning the world reacted. Headlines blared about Caspian Vera's decision. Unprecedented refusal. CEO walks away from billion-dollar deal. Market shaken by sudden exit. His name trended across financial channels, analysts speculating endlessly. Inside his penthouse, the noise was distant, muted by walls that no longer felt like a fortress. Caspian watched the scrolling banners on the television without flinching. For once, he didn't measure himself by the tick of stock values or the volume of applause. Instead, he measured by the sound coming from the other room, Liana's laughter as Alara helped her with a craft project. He turned the television off. Moments later, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was his most trusted advisor, one who had been at his side since the company's early days. Caspian answered. You really did it, the man said, disbelief and a touch of awe in his voice. I did, Caspian replied calmly. They'll stabilize, but you know it won't be easy for them, or for you. Some will call it reckless. Let them, Caspian said. I call it necessary. A pause. Then, quieter. Are you happier? Caspian glanced toward the kitchen where Alara was cutting fruit, her sleeves rolled, Liana perched on a stool beside her. Yes, he answered simply. After the call, he joined them. Alara handed him a slice of apple, her expression unreadable but her eyes softer than before. You've caused an uproar, she said lightly. I've caused a beginning, he corrected. Liana looked up, curious. What's an uproar? Alara chuckled. It means people are surprised. Oh, Liana said, unconcerned. She popped a grape into her mouth and grinned. The ordinariness of the moment struck Caspian more deeply than any boardroom victory ever had. He reached for another slice of apple, savoring it slowly, as if to mark the shift in his life. Later that day he returned to the office one final time, not to reclaim power but to close a chapter. His assistant had already packed personal items, framed awards, bound reports, a silver pen given at a gala. Caspian looked at them briefly, then set most aside. The only things he kept were a photograph from his first office opening and a notebook filled with sketches of early business models. Employees watched quietly as he walked through the halls. Some faces showed shock, others disappointment, but a few carried respect. A young analyst whispered, "Thank you," as he passed. Caspian nodded once, accepting the word without question. In the boardroom where it had all unfolded, he paused. The contract lay signed, not by him, but by a deputy authorized to carry on. The company would endure. The empire would march forward, and he would no longer be bound to it. He left the building with no entourage, no photographers invited, just a man stepping away from the shadow he had once mistaken for himself. That evening, he returned to Alara's home. Liana greeted him at the door, brandishing the paper sun they had made together. "We put it on the fridge," she declared proudly. Caspian knelt, admiring it as if it were a masterpiece. "It looks perfect there." Alara stood behind, watching them. Her eyes softened. "She's been waiting all day to show you." He rose, meeting Alara's gaze. "So have I." They moved into the living room, the three of them settling together. Caspian read aloud from The Secret Garden, his voice steady, while Liana leaned against his side. Alara sat close, her hand resting lightly on the cushion between them. At a pause in the story, Caspian looked down at his daughter. "Do you know what this book is about?" She shook her head. "It's about finding something you thought was lost forever," he said gently, "and discovering it still has life in it." Leanna smiled, satisfied, and urged him to keep reading. When the night drew late, Caspian helped tuck her into bed. Alara lingered at the doorway, watching as he smoothed the blanket and kissed her forehead. The tenderness in the gesture tightened something deep inside her chest. Back in the living room, Alara spoke quietly. "You've changed everything." "No," Caspian said. "You and Liana did. I only chose to see it." She studied him for a long moment. "And what will you do now? Without the Empire?" "Build something better," he said simply. "A life with you both. No quarterly reports, just steady days." For the first time, Alara didn't respond with caution. She smiled, faint but real, as Caspian prepared to leave for the night. Liana's voice called sleepily from her room. "Daddy?" The word froze him in place. He turned, eyes burning. "Yes? Good night," she murmured. His throat tightened. "Good night, sweetheart." The door closed softly. Caspian stood still, letting the word echo inside him. It was not a title earned by contracts or battles. It was a name given by love. Alara approached, her voice quiet. "She called you what you've always been." Caspian looked at her, his chest full. "And now I'll never let her doubt it." For years, he had fought to build a name that commanded power. Tonight, he carried a new name that carried something greater, Father. And standing beside Alara, he felt another truth taking root. Partner. The climax was not in the deal he walked away from, but in the family he walked toward. And as he left with the promise of tomorrow, the weight of old ambitions slipped away, replaced by a strength he had never known. The night air was cool as Caspian stood at Alara's doorstep once more. He had been there many times in recent weeks, yet tonight felt different. There was a stillness, a sense that the story which had been fractured years ago was now reaching the page where endings and beginnings meet. He raised his hand, hesitated, then knocked softly. The door opened, and there she was, Alara, her hair loose, her eyes reflecting both surprise and anticipation. "Caspian," she whispered. He swallowed, the weight of years pressing on his chest. "I came because I need to say it plainly. I choose you, I choose her, I choose us." Before she could answer, a smaller voice echoed from the hallway. "Mommy, who's at the door?" Liana appeared, clutching her stuffed rabbit. When she saw him, her face lit with pure joy. "Daddy," she exclaimed, running forward. Caspian dropped to his knees instinctively, arms wide. She leapt into his embrace, and in that instant, the years of absence, regret, and silence dissolved into the warmth of her small body pressed against him. Alara stood in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, tears brimming. She had longed for this moment without daring to admit it, even to herself. To see her daughter call him by the name that carried truth, to see Caspian hold her with such tenderness, it looked as if he would never let go. Caspian rose slowly, lifting Liana into his arms. His eyes locked with Alara's, shining with emotion. "We are a family," he said softly, voice trembling. Alara's tears spilled freely. She stepped forward and in one motion wrapped her arms around both of them. The three stood together in the doorway, a circle finally closed, a wound finally sealed. Liana giggled, squeezing them both. "Now it's perfect," she declared with childlike certainty. Caspian kissed the top of her head, his voice breaking. "Yes, sweetheart, it's perfect." They moved inside, settling onto the couch, still tangled together. Alara reached for Caspian's hand, not out of hesitation but out of instinct, as though it had always belonged there. He squeezed gently, grounding them both. For a long while, they said nothing. The silence was no longer painful. It was full of forgiveness, of promises, of love reborn. Alara finally spoke. "Do you realize what tonight means?" Caspian nodded. "It means the end of running. It means the beginning of being present." Liana yawned, curling against Alara's side. "We should all sleep here together," she murmured sleepily. Alara smiled through tears. "Maybe not tonight, little one, but soon." Caspian brushed a curl from her cheek. "Soon," he echoed. That night, when he finally left, it wasn't with the ache of departure, but with the promise of return. For the first time, he felt he was not leaving behind pieces of himself. He was carrying them forward, whole. The following evening Caspian returned, not in a suit, not as the CEO the world demanded, but as a man carrying hope. He brought nothing but a single flower for Alara and a small sketchbook for Leanna. When she opened the door, he offered both with a quiet smile. "For you," he said to Alara. "For us," he said to Leanna. They welcomed him inside, and the home felt different, lighter, fuller. Leanna eagerly pulled him to the table, flipping open the sketchbook. "Draw with me," she insisted. Caspian obliged, sketching clumsy shapes that made her giggle. Alara joined in, and soon the three of them were bent over the pages, laughing as their lines crossed and merged. At one point, Leanna drew 3 stick figures holding hands beneath the sun. She labeled them with careful letters. Mommy, Daddy, me. She looked up, beaming. "That's us." Caspian's throat tightened. But this time he did not look away. He met Alara's gaze, and in her eyes he saw the same truth. This was their story. Now, rewritten not in contracts or grand gestures, but in a child's certainty. Later, after Leanna had gone to bed, Caspian and Alara remained in the living room. The quiet was gentle, no longer strained. Alara broke it first. "You've given up so much for us." He shook his head. "No, I gave up noise for meaning. I thought power was everything. But what is power if it leaves you empty at home? With you and Leanna, I have more than I ever built with glass towers and boardrooms." Alara's eyes shimmered. "And if the world judges you for it, let them," he said. "They don't live my life. They don't tuck our daughter into bed. They don't see you smile when she laughs. That's mine. That's ours." Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for his. "Caspian, I was so afraid we'd never find our way back." He squeezed her hand firmly. "We didn't find our way back. We found a new path forward, and I won't let go of it." Tears rolled freely down her cheeks. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. For a moment, they simply breathed together, the closeness mending years of silence. Caspian pressed a kiss to her hair, gentle, reverent. In that quiet, the weight of their journey settled. They had known love, lost it, suffered the emptiness of separation, and now returned, not as the same people but as stronger ones, tested, scarred, yet deeply alive. The front door rattled slightly in the evening wind, but inside, the home was still safe, whole. Caspian whispered, "We are enough, just as we are." Alara nodded, her tears easing into a smile. "We are." As they sat together, the glow of the lamp spilling across their joined hands, Caspian realized this was the true resolution of his story, not the applause of strangers, but the embrace of the two people who mattered most. When Leanna stirred and called softly from her room, "Mommy, Daddy," they rose together, answering not as fragments, but as a family. Inside, she reached for them both, her small arms wrapping around their necks as they leaned close. The three of them stayed that way, clinging, breathing, hearts aligned. Tears flowed freely, Alara's of release, Caspian's of gratitude, Leanna's soft with sleep but sure in love. It was not the flawless ending of a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. If stories of love and redemption inspire you, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a new story. Every story carries more than its characters. Beneath the names and scenes lies the quiet heartbeat of meaning, and in Caspian and Alara's journey, that heartbeat is unmistakable. They began as two young dreamers, he with logic and ambition, she with warmth and artistry. Together, they built love that felt unshakable. Yet even the strongest bonds can fracture under silence and unmet longing. Their heartbreak came not from lack of love, but from the weight of unspoken words. That silence cost them years apart, each carrying their grief in different ways. Caspian turned to power, believing achievements would numb the ache. Alara turned to quiet, believing solitude would shield her heart. But emptiness has a way of echoing. No matter how high he climbed, no matter how carefully she hid, both carried the memory of what had been lost. The return was not simple. It came in the softest voice, a child's voice, calling Mommy. That sound cracked open the armor Caspian had built and placed him face to face with the impossible, a daughter he never knew, a truth that changed everything. From there, the story was not about empire or conquest. It was about courage, the courage to face wounds long buried, to ask questions that hurt, to hear answers that ached. Caspian had to confront the pain of being left out of his daughter's first years. Alara had to confront the fear of letting him close again. Both had to choose whether love could be rebuilt not from memory, but from new trust. Their choice was not made in one grand moment. It was made in countless small ones, a swing pushed at the park, a bedtime story read with care, a glass of water offered without words, a kiss asked for with reverence. Each act stitched together what silence had once torn apart. When the ultimate test came, the billion-dollar contract demanding years, abroad, Caspian stood at the crossroads of his old life and his new. The man he once was would have signed without hesitation. The man he had become looked at a child's drawing and saw truth clearer than any profit margin. He walked out, not to abandon success, but to choose a success deeper than headlines could ever capture. The resolution was not just in Alara's tears, nor in Liana's laughter, but in the embrace that bound them as a family. It was in Caspian, hearing the word daddy for the first time and understanding that this name outweighed every title he had ever carried. So what do we learn from this story? We learn that silence is the greatest enemy of love. Words unsaid can wound more deeply than harsh ones spoken. We learn that power and wealth mean little if they are not shared with those who love us. We learn that even when dreams break, life can surprise us with gifts once thought impossible. But most of all, we learn that true love endures, not as an untouched perfect flame, but as one that flickers, struggles, and then burns stronger when tended with patience. Caspian and Alara's love was not flawless. It bore scars, yet it was real, and in its imperfection lay its strength. As you listen to their story, perhaps you see reflections of your own life. Maybe you've known silence that broke something precious. Maybe you've chased goals that left you hollow. Or maybe you felt the fear of opening your heart again after pain. Let Caspian and Alara remind you, it is never too late to choose differently. It is never too late to reach for the people who matter most. And it is never too late for love, if you are willing to meet it with honesty, humility, and hope. Because sometimes the greatest victories are not found in boardrooms or contracts, but in the quiet moments. A child's laughter, a partner's hand reaching back, a family standing together after years apart. That is the truth of this story. That is its gift.